Hello friends, this is Shobha Shukla from CNS. A very good morning, good afternoon and good evening to all of you who have gathered today from different parts of the world at this second annual Global Media Forum in lead up to World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, or WAAW as we call it, that begins on November 18. This Global Media Forum is being organized by CNS and is co-hosted by 16 media and journalist associations. Their names in alphabetical order are Asia Pacific Media Alliance for Health and Development, Cool FM Radio Nigeria, Dhaka Reporters Unity Bangladesh, Health Communications Forum Zimbabwe, Health Digest Journal Myanmar, Health Journalist Network in Uganda, Health TV Online Nepal, Kenya Environment and Science Journalists Association, Media Action Nepal, Medical Journalists Association of Ghana, Neon Metin, a media organization in Timor-Leste, Nepal Forum of Science Journalists, Sky Compet, a Portuguese network of science communication, South Africa Science Journalists Association, Sri Lanka Working Journalists Association, and Thailand Society of Environmental Journalists. So we have today journalists from different sectors and different walks of life: health, agriculture, food, science, environment. As we all know, antimicrobial resistance, or AMR as we call it, occurs when bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites change over time and no longer respond to medicines, making infections and illnesses difficult to treat. AMR is impacting not only human health, but also affecting animal, plant, and environmental health. The multi-sectoral One Health approach, which recognizes the interconnection between people, animals, plants, and environment, is key to tackling AMR. This Global Media Forum aims to create awareness and support media understanding and communications on antimicrobial resistance. Today, we will have direct interface with senior experts from the quadripartite organizations that have united to address the threats of AMR to global health security. These quadripartite organizations include the World Health Organization, or WHO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, FAO, the UN Environment Program, UNEP, and the World Organization for Animal Health, WOAH. Today's program will have 3 sessions: the inaugural session, followed by a session on AMR and human health, animal health, food and agriculture, and the environment, followed by the session on regional and country perspectives on AMR and why the One Health approach is so vital to address the global challenge of AMR. Each of these 3 sessions will be followed by a question and answer session. Participants, please type in your questions and comments in the Q&A box, which you must be seeing on your screen. You may do so even as the speakers present and not wait till the end. Only questions relevant to the topics under discussion today will be taken up. Also, please pardon and bear with any unforeseen technical glitches that might arise during the course of the program. There has been a request from some journalists to put the caption sign on. So if anyone does not want it, you can hide it from your screen. Without any further ado, I now invite Dr. Haileyesus Getahun, who holds 2 very important positions when it comes to mobilizing a global response to AMR and One Health. He is the Director, Global Coordination and Partnership on AMR, and also the Director of the Quadripartite Joint Secretariat on AMR at the WHO. He will be inaugurating this 2nd annual Global Media Forum in lead up to WAAW 2022 by his expert talk on global overview and the One Health approach in the context of antimicrobial resistance. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Shukla. Can I share my screen, or how I want to proceed?
Yes, please share your screen, sir. Please share the screen.
Is it okay now? So,
yeah, yes, it is okay. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for organizing this meeting, and also for inviting me to give this introductory presentation. So what I will try to give is really to give you an overview of the comprehensive AMR complexity as well as the response. So just to start with my the global burden, and this is about AMR is about bacteria, it's about fungus, it's about virus, and it's also about parasites. But this figure, which you see here, is only about bacterial infections, and this is the latest data that was released earlier, this year, which actually showed that the bacterial resistance to antibiotics can cause directly 1.3 million diseases among humans, and also indirectly causes, or it contributes, or it's associated with nearly 5 million annual diseases. This is a huge human cost that bring antimicrobial resistance at the top killer of all diseases and of all conditions. And unfortunately, like many other communicable diseases, the greatest burden of antimicrobial resistance is also in sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia. So this is a human cost. But what about the economic burden? The economic impact is also huge, and this is a report that was released by World Bank in 2017. When, if no action is taken now, this causes up to 1.2 trillion annual additional expenditure by 2050. And also with no action, up to 24 million additional people, particularly in low-income countries, will go into extreme poverty. So why is this happening? This is happening because we know that the antimicrobials are shared between humans, animals, and plants. And this itself causes an interface of the challenge. And we know that these beings share the pathogens and also the antimicrobials, and whatever antimicrobials are also used for non-veterinary and non-phytosanitary indications in animals and plants. And we have also evidence that there is a correlation of transmission of resistant bacteria between food producing animals and humans who are processing those animals. And we have also a worrying finding that up to the proportion of antimicrobial compounds with resistance in chicken, pig, and cattle has actually increased and is more than 50% in the last decade. We have also other economic implications. For example, this is just to give you how AMR could interface with tourism, with traveling, and can also raise an alarm that could affect the economy as well as the movement of humans and animals. We also know infectious diseases are linked with the climate crisis in many ways. And AMR, the drug-resistant infections, which are a byproduct of those, can also be linked with climate crisis, which has its significant and devastating impact in low middle income countries and small island developing states. And what we know is also this link between climate crisis and AMR is the most less focused and less researched area, for example, that actually also affects the necessary political attention, scientific attention that it should get. And we also know that even if there are no indicators for sustainable development goals for AMR, no targets, we have introduced in the 2020, two indicators for bloodstream infections in the human sector in SDG 3. We know that it can affect all these other 6 SDGs directly, and it could be linked up to 11 others as well. So what are the factors for this? Oh, can you see my slides, or is it?
Yes.
Okay, so what are the determinants and the drivers of AMR? So this slide shows the complexity, what I was referring earlier. And this complexity has one foundational driver, the misuse and the overuse of antimicrobials. The more we use antimicrobials for the needs that they are not indicated, we are exacerbating the burden and the risk and the transmission of antimicrobial resistance. The more we have less water, sanitation, and hygiene due to lack of access to clean water, for example, or lack of proper and appropriate infection prevention measures, we are also exacerbating infection transmission, and then the need for antimicrobials and antibiotics particularly. And this also leads to discharge into the environment. And then this in a way also affects by increasing the cost for human health as well as animal health, and also affecting the food and feed production, businesses, trade, which eventually will cause impact on the economy. So I think that is why we are saying we cannot address antimicrobial resistance only by focusing on a single sector. Our response has to accommodate all these drivers and all these different sectors, and should have a comprehensive approach, what we call One Health. So what is One Health? This is the agreed definition. As you know, One Health has been a new concept. It has been a concept that has been there for a long time, but it has now been getting prominence because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was a definition that is given by the One Health high-level evidence panel that gives this definition, that One Health is an integrated unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystem. And it recognizes the health of humans, domestic and wild animals, plants, and the wider environment are closely linked and interdependent. So that is why we are saying One Health approach is critically important for antimicrobial resistance response, because it will help us to deal with human, animal, plant, and environment in a comprehensive manner. So what are we doing as Quadripartite, as the 4 organizations with a mandate to address this global crisis? Number one, we have been working actually for long on different health issues, but the Quadripartite renewed their commitment on AMR since 2018. initially starting a tripartite, focused collaboration and memorandum of understanding, and then which subsequently led into the development of strategic framework, which has yielded. And now we are so happy also, we have equally recognized the importance of environment in the response of antimicrobial resistance. And as of March this year, the United Nations Environment Programme has officially joined the tripartite collaboration that has been there for decades into now we are called the Quadripartite. And the most important point is that we know as Quadripartite what we want to achieve, what we want to do for AMR. And this is a strategic framework that actually stipulates the vision we have, how we can address, how we can work together to address this global crisis. And our goal, and we believe this should be actually the goal of every stakeholder, wherever they are, is to ensure that we have all efforts need to be directed at preserving antimicrobial efficiency and effectiveness, so that we have the with sustainable and equitable access to antimicrobials for responsible and prudent use in humans, animals, and plants. And then we need to contribute also to the SDGs. And we have also specific objectives. All these efforts should really lead into impact and result. So we want to focus on optimizing the production and use of antimicrobials along the whole life cycle, from the starting of research and development into the disposal. We want to see in a holistic manner. And then we want to also address decreasing the incidence of infections in humans, animals, and plants, so that we will reduce the development and the spread of AMR. And ultimately, our goal is to bring that impact and result at countries by helping them in designing capacity and sustainably implementing evidence-based interventions across the One Health spectrum. So we are also working, because finance is incredibly important. The most important bottleneck we have today, which is also identified by our survey, which happens every year, is that even though we have more than 170 countries having their national action plan, it's only 20% who have actually dedicated funding linked to that. So without money, and also looking into what other successful health programs did in the past, it was only through the availability of money. We are also prioritizing to build the economic case for AMR. So as part of that, we are now developing a process to define the cost of inaction as well as the return of investment. What will you gain if you invest $1 in AMR? We have in the past knowledge that, for example, investing $1 in TB interventions, it can yield $30 US. $1 in vaccination programs can yield $15 So we want to actually also develop that sort of argument for building the case for antimicrobial resistance. And this entails developing the package of priority interventions and across all sectors in the 4 areas. And then we have to also help countries how they can actually use this investment case also to generate domestic financing as well as external financing. So this is our major challenge, which we are also focusing to address it. For this, we get support from the Global Leaders Group on AMR, which is established in November 2020 to actually lead and bring political attention and political action on AMR because of its complexity, and it's also span across all sectors. This crisis requires the highest possible political attention. For that, we have the co-chairs of the prime ministers of Barbados and Bangladesh. I'm pretty sure you will recognize particularly the prime minister of Barbados, how she's championing the climate crisis and other initiatives. And we are very much grateful. She's also embraced AMR as one of her passion to advocate for that, along with the prime minister of Bangladesh. And we have also, ministers and high, private sector representatives, as you can see from here. So the Global Leaders Group has been working by first focusing its activities and priorities through its action plan. So the action plan had identified 6 priority areas with key performance indicators. And this is freely available on the website of the Global Leaders Group, amrleaders.org. You can have a look. Each and every area of these 6 areas, the political action, the transforming systems, the surveillance, the financing, the research and development, as well as the environment dimension priority areas, they have their own key performance indicators for which the Global Leaders Group is acting with a focused approach. And as part of that, the Global Leaders Group also bring attention to critical areas that require attention. As I said, financing is a major bottleneck, which we are working on. So they have information not on financing, and also surveillance is important. We need to know what is the extent of the problem. And when we want to know the extent of the problem, as complex as it is, as it cuts across all these sectors, we need to be able to find a common ground that will help us, our actions, both for programs as well as for political action. So they have developed the surveillance information note for that. And also the interface with climate crisis, as I mentioned earlier, it is a neglected area. So they have brought this information note just to ensure that we have given the due attention and, more importantly, the scientific interest and the resources for climate crisis and also the impact of environment. So what did they achieve since they established? And I think the most important thing was to unlock the bottlenecks of the 5-year negotiation on the Codex Intergovernmental Task Force, which has been instrumental to actually guide the response of antimicrobial resistance in food systems. And this will really help us how to actually prevent and mitigate AMR in the foodborne situations. And the Global Leaders Group played a critical role in unblocking this stalemate of negotiation. The other key performance indicator for the GLG was also to advocate for high-level ANGA meeting either in 2024 and 2026. And this was published in July 2022. In 2021, and in March 2022, the General Assembly has actually endorsed the establishment of high-level meeting for AMR in 2024. And now preparations are undergone in order to ensure. And as you know, the 2016 political declaration of the UN General Assembly has been transformational, particularly in pushing countries to develop their national action plan and also galvanize multi-sectoral response for AMR. So we believe now, building on that, this high-level meeting in 2024 will bring much more focused commitment and action that will actually bring some transformational change and impact in the response to AMR, particularly for countries. So the Global Leaders Group, the other thing is we are engaged closely with G7 and G20, particularly in helping them to have more specific commitments, because for G7 and G20, commitment, political commitment in words is not a problem for AMR. If you really go and see the political declarations and the manifesto of these leaders since 2015, AMR has been, adequately, profusely mentioned and, supported. But there are not specific outcomes and commitments that are coming from these statements and political declarations. So the GLG is closely working with these entities, G7 and G20, in order to ensure that there are much more specific commitments based on these 5 asks. And we have also witnessed a glimmer of hope in the last declaration from the G7 presidency of Germany, where there are some specific commitments that are coming out based on this discussion. And before that, also from the G7 presidency of UK, we have also seen the same level of specificity. But it's a long way, but I think it's on the right track to really push these rich nations to enhance commitment for AMR, not only in supporting low and middle income countries, but also in changing their own system. The other most important is current ongoing discussion on the pandemic accord. As you know, following the COVID pandemic, the WHO has been having a long process of developing a legally binding pandemic accord. And the GLG is closely working in order to ensure that AMR is part of that pandemic accord. And we have been working in different, justifying why there is co-benefit between AMR and pandemic response. So we believe that will also help to address, because AMR is an ongoing, not well recognized, pandemic. And I think this pandemic accord will really help us to step up the response to it. Finally, I would like to also mention that the third high-level ministerial conference on AMR will be held next week, actually, in Oman, Muscat, and this is the third ministerial conference. The first ministerial conference was held in Netherlands in 2014, and that ministerial conference resulted in the Global Action Plan of 2015, the WHO Global Action Plan on AMR, which has later been endorsed by FAO and WOAH, and then also catalyzed for the 2016 high-level meeting on AMR. So these are major outcomes of a ministerial meeting. The second ministerial meeting was held after 5 years in 2019, again hosted by Netherlands. And the main outcome of that ministerial meeting was the release of the establishment of the multi-partner trust fund on AMR, which supports the quadripartite organizations to work together to bring, to support countries for a One Health response. And this was started by $5 million commitment from the Netherlands government, which today has raised $26 million and supporting directly 11 countries. So now the question is, what should be the equivalent major outcome from this ministerial conference next week, the third one? So the Muscat Ministerial Manifesto, which is already on the web, which has been negotiated, will be the major outcome of this ministerial conference. And the uniqueness of this ministerial conference, ministerial manifesto, is that for the first time, there are proposed targets for antimicrobial resistance. There are 3 targets proposed in this manifesto as an outcome. Member states, countries been negotiating and discussing, and there will be endorsement next week. So the three targets in this manifesto are: number one, to reduce the use of antimicrobials in agri-food system between 30 to 50% by 2030. The second target is zero use of medically important antimicrobials in animals and in plants for non-veterinary and non-phytosanitary indications. That means when it is not necessarily needed, to treat infection or to prevent infection, properly indicated. And the third one is for humans, and it is to ensure that the antibiotics category, what we call access antibiotics, and these are commonly available antibiotics, which are not very much susceptible to develop drug resistance, and to make sure these antibiotics are prescribed in 60% of all prescriptions in patients. So these three targets are proposed in this ministerial manifesto. And in addition to that, the ministerial meeting is also planning to including these targets for the upcoming high-level meeting in 2024, because that high-level meeting will have a political declaration that will have specific commitments. So if countries start discussing, start negotiating to be much more committed in terms of also agreeing on targets, I think that will be an important step towards bringing impact and result in countries for AMR. And as I said, there is a website for this conference. It will be live streamed next week, so you can follow through, you can report about it. And if you want any further information, we are happy to provide you that information. So with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Getahun, for such an informative talk. And we already have many questions pouring in. Your talk has really given us lot of food for thought to our participants. Judith Okolo wants to know, to understand the interface between AMR and climate change. And so please answer that first, I think.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have already an information note posted on the website of the Global Leaders Group. So I strongly recommend the person who asks the question to go and review that. That will give you the latest evidence and also the gaps of evidence why we need to do that. But there is a link, and we are working on that, but there are also gaps that we have to, generate the evidence in order to define and guide our interventions.
Thank you. Manjari Perez from Sri Lanka says it's a very important presentation, sir. She wants to know if there is any funding gap for full implementation of the One Health approach globally.
Say it again. I am trying to look at the questions. What did you say?
Is there any funding gap for full implementation of One Health globally?
Yes, as I mentioned, we are getting these self-reported what we call tracks from countries which the quadripartite organizations are collecting data and information. And one indicator is around financing, and also about their plan being financed. So the latest data we have is, although most countries have multi-sectoral national action plans, those action plans are just papers put in drawers because they are not funded in 80% of those countries. So definitely this shows that there is real gap around financing. We also know that there is no global fund for AMR. As much, as extensive as the problem is, there is no global fund. So that's also another indication for the need, for financing. And most importantly, and probably in a positive development, the Global Fund for HIV/TB Malaria, in its latest replenishment, they have asked 18 billion US dollar, which also include partly AMR as part of the pandemic preparedness segment of that call. And that gives us some hope, particularly to respond to the human health sector side. And the human health sector side can use the already established infrastructure of the Global Fund for HIV/TB Malaria, particularly around laboratory to enhance, diagnosis, for example, because Global Fund has played an important role in strengthening systems within the countries of its focus for HIV/TB Malaria and beyond. So having a bacterial diagnosis facility within that already existing infrastructure could be an added on and a low-hanging fruit really to advance. Similarly, infection prevention measures could easily integrate antimicrobial resistance, particularly the bacteria one, because remember, drug resistance in TB, drug resistance in malaria is all, and the drug resistance in HIV is also antimicrobial resistance. So what is missing here is the bacterial diagnosis. So using those structures could really be helpful. So unfortunately now, the Global Fund was able to mobilize not the full 18 billion that they were hoping, but they have mobilized, I think, more than 14 billion. I think UK has also added, so it could be more than that. So I think that is also a good opportunity, but this often comes through countries. So this is probably where your support is also needed in order to advocate for countries when they are applying for Global Fund for HIV/TB Malaria. They should also to consider the possibility of integrating AMR through those national processes, so that could be helpful. The other possibility is a new pandemic fund that was released a couple of months ago and by the World Bank, which has raised more than $1 billion, which could also give an opportunity for AMR to be considered for actually investment for countries. So that is also another opportunity coming. In addition to that, there is also an advocacy movement, particularly led by the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, where she has increasingly been assertive in advocating a windfall tax of major companies to support global goods. Global goods, which also include AMR and antibiotics. So those movements and advocacy will hopefully one day will yield. But what I can really underline is financing is the rate limiting factor for our success in the global response for AMR. Thank you.
Thank you. Okelo Jesus, news reporter from 89.5 Speak FM, Uganda, wants to know that antimicrobial resistance is a big global health security threat in countries like Uganda. And how can we journalists report on AMR effectively that will impact our audience?
Yeah, I think this is a very good point, a very good question. Of course, journalism requires agility and flexibility. So in my view, I think you have to always keep your eyes open and agile to look for opportunities. AMR, as I tried to mention in my presentation, it cut across so many sectors, so many, situations and being. It's related to tourism. It's related to economic development. It is related to food security. It's not only about, global health security. It is related also with food security, food safety. So as journalists, trying to expand your understanding and as well as your agility, depending on the local context, the national context, what could that be to report, or what opportunity is coming which you would like to actually seize and report will be good. And I think for that, there are quite a number of information resources available on the website of the Quadripartite. If you go and check, you will get all possible information. And I also believe the course you will be attending today will give you the gist of what is needed really to help and report. But my advice would be, just always take note that it is a comprehensive, multi-sectoral area that could cover. So try to find opportunity, not to miss opportunities, and seize whatever is available for agile reporting.
Zafar Kidwai from Pakistan wants to know if there is evidence that One Health approach results in lower AMR problems. And he thanks you for sharing economic benefit for every penny spent on this.
Yeah, so I think the One Health is an approach. One Health is an umbrella where, as I tried to mention, to define, where we have to work across different sectors, across different areas, to bring some cohesiveness and some work, as it was defined in the slide I showed. So we have to be very careful what it means. It is like an umbrella that brings all the issues together. So the evidence generation goes more into the components that come under it. So the One Health AMR is just one of the many segments of problems that should come under this umbrella. So we have AMR, for example, we have zoonosis, we have other biodiversity, environment-related, problems and issues. So I think we have to bear in mind it is a way of working rather than an intervention itself. So normally, of course, you can generate the evidence or the impact, how working together can bring or reduce AMR. And for that, we are actually working to define what are the research priorities for AMR, working across this One Health spectrum. And I think that research agenda is going to be finalized by the end of this year. So that will give what are the top most research agenda that will really help to address AMR across the One Health response that needs to be taken. So I think by then we will also get more clarity on the evidence needed and also on the evidence available. Over.
Okay, thank you. I'll take just one more question as we are running short of time. Moses Vakesa Vanjala from Kenya News Agency wants to know, do health facilities contribute to the rate of antimicrobial resistance through maybe misdiagnosis, wrong laboratory results, repeat of medication without progress in a patient getting better? How to curb this when it should not be happening in the first place?
Yeah, thank you. I think the short answer for that question is yes. But I think that is exactly what we have to prevent. But in order to prevent that from happening, there are so many challenges and complexities. Because as I mentioned earlier, the diagnosis of bacterial infections is not well developed, particularly in the global south, for many reasons. Number one, there are few diagnostics tools available, and even those available, they are very expensive and not able to be, easily affordable for facilities in the south, like you mentioned. And in addition to that, there are also some clinical challenges. For example, we have, diagnostic tools that could really differentiate between a common cold, a flu, and a true bacterial infection, really help us to prevent that person with a flu, because since it is a viral infection, will not benefit from antibiotic prescription. So having those type of investigations will be important, but unfortunately not available at this point in time. However, it doesn't mean that we have nothing to do. I think proper training of health workers and ensuring that there is what we call proper antimicrobial stewardship mechanisms, I think will be extremely important. And for that, particularly for the human health sector, the WHO has released the integrated antimicrobial stewardship policy with clear activities that needs to be taken, that needs to be implemented really to avoid the scenario and the situation you have mentioned. So ensuring the implementation of those policies, and also making sure health workers are adequately trained, and also not only trained but also supported and also supervised, I think will be extremely useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Dr. Getahun, if you have time, perhaps you can type in the answers to some of the questions which are in the Q&A box and have not been taken up due to we are running behind schedule. Thank you very much once again. And we now move on to our next session on AMR and human, animal, plant, and environmental health. I request Junxia Song, Senior Animal Health Officer and AMR Coordinator at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, to please enlighten us on how AMR affects food systems. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shukla. I will put on my slides. Just a moment.
Yes.
Did you see my slides? Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see it. Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay, thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, and maybe good evening, colleagues. I'm very pleased to be here in this very important events just before the Awareness Week. So AMR is one of the top 10 global public health challenges. It affects the human health, livelihoods, including through agri-food systems, wild animal and plant production. I think Hailey just give a very good overview from on AMR and One Health perspective. I would like to take this opportunity to share some perspective on AMR and the agri-food system, including why it is important to address AMR in agri-food system and how this contributes to achieving SDGs, and how I feel support the members to combat AMR, and what other key I feel initiatives, flagships on AMR, and also the partnership for upskilled One Health awareness on and action on AMR. So the 2030 agenda is the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. Embedded within this agenda, there are 17 sustainable development goals, which addresses the global challenges we are facing, including the poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace and justice, AMR will directly or indirectly impacts a range of the SDGs, including the SDG 3, good health and well-being, and the SDG 2, zero hunger, SDG 1, no poverty, SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, and SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. For example, around 1.3 billion people rely on livestock for their livelihoods, and 20 million people depend on aquaculture, especially in low and middle income countries. The spread of resistant strains of pathogens affects their livelihoods as it increases animal losses. So up to 28 million people may be driving into extreme poverty by 2050 if no action taken from now. So why to address AMR is important? I'm showing these two figures on the screen, and 76 of the antimicrobials commonly used in food animals are also important for human medicine, And 73% of all antimicrobials sold globally, they are used in food animals. So from the One Health context, those figures makes the agri-food sector pivotal in response to the global AMR burden. So AMR has been a key priority for FAO. The activities of FAO's engagement on AMR issues can be traced to, I think, the year 2014, with FAO's contribution to the development of the Global Action Plan on AMR. So then the commitment of FAO members to work on AMR confirmed in 2015, since the adoption of resolution at the 39th session of FAO conference in 2015. So the FAO's new strategic framework from 2022 to 2031, FAO has emphasized the One Health as cross-cutting and important approach that needs to be considered across sectors in agri-food systems. AMR was identified as one of the priorities under One Health perspective. And FAO spares no effort to support our members to address AMR in different areas, including livestock and aquaculture, animal health, food and feed safety, genetic resources, crop production, natural resource management, behavior change, and strengthening of regulatory frameworks, and other related areas in food and agriculture sectors. FAO published the second AMR action plan in 2021, which are fully aligned with the global action plan. It was setting out 5 objectives, including number 1, increasing awareness and stakeholders engagement, including here behavior change. And number 2, surveillance and research. Number 3, enabling best practice to prevent infection. Number 4, promote responsible use. Number 5 is strengthening governance. So up to date, more than 50 countries has received technical support from FAO through the implementation, the FAO action plan, including projects or applying FAO tools or interventions. And data and evidence, they are the key to address AMR. So to strengthening evidence-based intervention policies, FAO developed a prototype for the International FAO Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring Data Platform. The acronym is NFAM, and we are going to fill the information gap in agri-food system. So last year, 26 countries joined the pilot of this NFAM. So it will support the countries in collecting, analyzing, and using their AMR data from animals and food for national purpose, and also support countries willing to make AMR data publicly available for global surveillance as a public common goods for international advocacy and action on AMR. So maybe you already know, since 2015, WHO, through a global surveillance system, GLASS, collecting AMR, AMU data in human, and WOAH, collecting global AMU data in terrestrial and aquatic animals. So to build synergies within quadripartite organizations, FAO InFarm will collect AMR data from animals and food, and also the AMU data in plant and crops. So those data from the three organizations will be integrated and a global integrated system for surveillance of AMR and AMU. Initially, it's called TISA. At that time, we call tripartite. The TA means tripartite integrated system. I believe the name may be changed because now we are quadripartite. To strengthen the surveillance and the lab capacity, FAO developed an assessment tool for laboratories and the AMR surveillance system, FAO Atlas. The aim of FAO Atlas is to map national AMR surveillance systems, including its organizational function and linkage with other sectors, including individual labs and also lab network. And the tool also help to assess the monitoring and the surveillance capacities at the local, national, and also help the members to prioritize their action to improve the overall surveillance and monitoring system on AMR. So the tool has been used in 180 labs, including those labs come from governmental sector or research institutions, academia, and also private labs. So another tool available is the progress management pathway for AMR, FAO PMP AMR. This is a stepwise approach to support the implementation of AMR National Action Plan with focus on the components related to food and agriculture sectors. The PMP evaluation is multi-sectoral and also allows to identify the gaps in the implementation of the series of activities. They are planned in different stages and also in the areas of awareness, governance, good practices, and surveillance. So this tool has been applied in 22 countries. There are more pipeline countries in this year to applying this One Health tool. So a CAP study is showing the AMR was driven by a range of behaviors across the production cycle. So from this slide, I just showing an example how FAOs facilitate behavior change through farmer field school. We have pilot behavior change intervention through farmer field school in Africa. So on the slides on the left side, you can see we have the farmer field school in Ghana, Kenya, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And we got a very positive result and on after behavior change interventions. For example, 41.2% the participants, their response, they will give antimicrobials only when birds are sick. When I say birds, because this pharmacy school is focusing on poultry. So, and then there are 43.1 response proper record, they will keep proper record. And 41.2% say they will keeping to give regular hygienic practices. And then the most important, you can say, the participants, they said, increase the production compared to previous years. This is very important for sustainable, for any intervention and sustainability. We just mentioned antimicrobials is being used widely in agri-food systems. Overuse and inappropriate use would accelerate the resistance. And then that is the root cause of AMR emergence in agri-food system. So reducing the need for antimicrobials in agri-food system is the key to contain and control antimicrobial resistance. In 2021, AMR Global Leaders Group called for a significant reduction in the use of antimicrobial drugs in global food system and highlight to reduce the need for antimicrobials in food systems. FAO members also request FAO to take action to reduce the need in agri-food system in the governing bodies meetings. And from the governing bodies in FAO, we have a series of governing bodies meetings. One is meetings on livestock, and another meeting is on agriculture. We got the request from these two governing bodies meetings. So to align with the GLG call for action and also FAO members' request, and also based on some good experiences, farmer field school experiences, FAO is going to launch a global 10-year initiative to reduce the need, focusing on reduce the need of antimicrobials on farms. And the acronym, we get a short name, RENOFARM. So this will be a 10-year initiative. Following is a bottom-up approach. And this just on showing how we are going to address under RENOFARM to reduce the need. I'm thinking I saw a question when Haile make a presentation to ask how are you going to reduce the use EMU. So maybe this slide can really address that question. So you can see farm, they are in the call under RENOFARM because who are using antimicrobials? They are farmers, either livestock farmers, aquaculture, or even crops. So there are 3 layers of activities under RENOFARM. So at the farm level, that will be improve at there are different work streams, including, for example, improving biosecurity, improving vaccination, and also private alternatives to antimicrobials, and good husbandry practices and behavior change. So at a national level, and it strengthens the coordination, logistic frameworks for training and capacity building, awareness and advocacy, and also to support really finalizing the national their action plan, and also data sharing. At the international level, and there's existing supporting mechanisms are available. For example, we just mentioned TISA, NFARM, ORE animals, and Haile just mentioned, for example, the case investment and the case study. So RENOFARM will allow the countries to come together, both the ones maybe they already make efforts in this field, and also the countries with more limited resources or capacities. No one will be left behind to reduce the need in agri-food system. This is also could support the target. Haile just shared the target will be proposed in the manifesto in Muscat meeting next week. Move on to tripartite. I think it was Haile elaborated very well about tripartite collaboration and the quadripartite collaboration, sorry. The quadripartite solid cooperation framework provided a roadmap for the whole 4 organizations to tackle challenges at a human, animal, plant ecosystem interface using a more integrated and a more coordinated approach. Here, I want to just highlight one of the key initiatives established by Quadripartite and led by FAO is the AMR multi-stakeholder partnership platform. The establishment of this AMR multi-stakeholder partnership platform is a quadripartite response to the recommendation of the IACG report, No Time to Wait, and Secure the Future for Drug Resistance Infection. And the partnership is inclusive, international, and a multi-stakeholder venue that brings together cross human, animal, plant, environmental factors to assist in preserving antimicrobials as life-saving medicines. It is a voluntary collaborative coordination mechanism established by Quadripartite to catalyze a global movement for action against AMR, to contribute implementation of global action plan, and also the country national action plans. So this platform will be launched on November 18. So please join welcome to join this launch event and also join the platform. This is my last slide, just a summary, give a recap on my take-home messages. AMR is a global health and development issue that should be addressed collectively across One Health. Now, AMR is affecting agri-food systems, including animal plant production, to ensure safe and nutritious food. FAO deploys multiple initiatives working with public-private sector to upskills and amplifying a collective action. We all have a role to play to keep antimicrobials working. I'll stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Junxia, for sharing the key steps taken by FAO to address AMR. And yes, each one of us has a role to play in reducing this menace. Our next speaker is Jacqueline Álvarez, Chief Chemicals and Health Branch Economy Division, the UN Environmental Program, or UNEP. She will share with us the interconnection between AMR and the environment. Over to you, Jacqueline. You are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, sorry.
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, very clearly.
And can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a very important opportunity for all of us, of course, to reflect on where we are on antimicrobial resistance, but also to bring in those pillars that have been essential to addressing the topic that goes in a way beyond the regular approaches that we have had, including this environmental pillar as a very important element. As you know, for decades, antimicrobials have contributed to reducing infectious diseases in humans, animals, and plants, saving lives, increasing productivity. However, this effectiveness of antimicrobials, as you all know, is now compromised, is in jeopardy. Moreover, if we translate that into economic impacts on the global economy and also in inequalities, and when we go into SDGs, that also rings a bell, leaving no one behind, and all of the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals, we are becoming increasingly worse in the area of AMR. And it is not only urgent, but it needs to be adequately addressed. So antimicrobial resistance, as it was mentioned by the previous speaker, is a complex issue. It's a global issue and requires, for sure, united and coordinated efforts at the multi-sectoral level and also at the multinational level with different approaches. There is a strong commitment, political commitment at this moment, which is fantastic, with the Global Leaders Group, and you heard a lot about it at from the previous speakers, and we have our eyes put on the Oman conference right now, this high-level ministerial discussion where further political commitments can really become true, particularly to respond to the One Health approach and the One Health discussions. We really need to create a meaningful change at this moment that needs to be, at the end of the day, part of actions. The outcomes of the conference for us will be really essential for that. So historically, as you know, the major focus of AMR has been clinical setting and animal health. That has resulted that research and science is still in infancy, at least for the environment aspects, particularly to prevent, particularly in the risk setting agenda. Antimicrobials have been released into the environment, and those of you that follow the international governance, environmental governance, you have heard many times by different leaders in the world and going beyond the UN that we have been describing that we are facing a triple planetary crisis, and that goes into the climate change pillar, into the biodiversity loss pillar, and into the pollution and chemicals pillar. So for us, AMR is both a cause and a consequence of the triple planetary crisis. Antimicrobial resistance is leading threat to the global health, affecting the sustainability of the planet. And we have seen that also as one of the ingredients of the COVID-19 pandemic discussions. Imagine, and we have always been given this, a planet without antibiotics. Imagine ourselves beyond the Fleming time. The climate crisis and AMR are two of the greatest and more complex threats that we have at this moment in the world. As you also know, the rapid urbanization, intensive agri-food production systems have changed the land use, have created habitats that are different or lost. It has decreased biodiversity, and it has led to ecosystems degradation, with AMR potentially threatening also the health of those ecosystems. Beyond that, and together with that, we have the contaminated environments that have become sources of AMR. The pollution containing selective concentrations of antimicrobial compounds can really contribute to the generation of the AMR in the environment, but also to the spread. So from the side of UNEP, of the United Nations Environment Program, we are really working to provide science-based information that can really inform those strategies to address AMR, considering that the environmental dimensions are to be seen into the equation when we are discussing about the One Health, but they need to be ensured that they are adequately and equally reflected and addressed. The next slide. So you have heard a lot about the SDGs, so I will not enter into this one, but maybe just as a quick reflection is that I would like to go to SDG 12. SDG 12 talks about responsible consumption and production, and sometimes we tend to forget the power that consumers have in selecting the different commodities that are around us. And in this topic, that makes a whole difference. I am particularly coming from the developing world, from the global south. And usually when you go to the doctor, you request for more and more antibiotics, for more and more medicines to address the things, because you believe that they are going to remediate your problem. They are going to solve the situation. And you just forget to see things in an overarching manner. So I'm trying to address here the consumption part of the SDG 12, where we are, of course, all very responsible towards. So UNEA, you see there, UN Environment Assembly. This is a gathering of the world's highest level decision-making body on the environment. UNEA enjoys universal membership. It means the 193 UN member states, and it has full involvement of major groups and stakeholders. So it gathers ministers every 2 years in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya, but also it brings in multi-sectoral approaches, multi-sectoral thinking, as well as multi-stakeholders. Through UNEA, the intention is to really create and build a healthier environment to support the human beings for the generations to come. Why I'm saying this? Because UNEA 3 years ago requested and recognized the antimicrobial resistance occurrence and the problems that it is bringing for food security. And we heard our colleague from FAO talking about that and the importance of it, but also the sustainable development in countries. If we talk about poverty, that's very clear. So what did the ministers of environment request? They request UNEP, us, our organization, to really support the efforts towards the One Health approach and the One Health response to AMR. But more importantly, and this is what I would like to highlight here, they requested us to prepare a report on the environmental impacts of antimicrobial resistance and how it is caused, generated, and spread, particularly to understand the gaps that those impacts and causes are generating. When discussions started, we really understood that we could not focus on the impacts standalone. or in the causes standalone, but we needed to really discuss the environmental dimensions of AMR. And that brings not only the environment as maybe the environmental matrices that come into your mind when you think about it, meaning air, water, soil, but particularly to the media that brings in these dimensions. So UNEA recognized antimicrobial resistance element, and we are now working in finalizing that report that was requested. So I'm going to maybe discuss a little and share with you some of the elements that have been identified. And the work of UNEP started back in 2017, identifying this as an issue that needed to be addressed also from the environment perspective. That is a report which is called the Frontiers Report. And the idea with this, of course, is not only to respond to antimicrobial resistance, but also to see what is the source of the antimicrobial resistance. And one of the entry points that we have is the work on environmentally persistent pharmaceutical pollutants. And maybe some of you will say, well, but if we address the antibiotic side of AMR, they usually biodegrade or transform into others. But when we are talking about AMR, what you have there is the issue of waste. The issue of wastewater management is the issue of pesticides, and is the issue of those genes that are generated and being spread around. So what else are we doing somehow? The global report, the environmental dimensions report is one of those elements, but we are also working at the regional level. We are working at the national level. So here are some examples of those different angles and entry points that we have. At this moment, we are working together with WHO launching a joint environment and health initiative, where AMR is one of the topics there very, very strongly. And we are supporting India in the development of their national action plan, in their NAPs, but not the whole aspects, but those that are really related to awareness raising and the role of environment within the India context. We're also working with regional economic communities. We prepared some cases studies, in particular in Asia, targeting China, India, Philippines, Thailand. These case studies contain information on the status of selected countries on AMR, some lessons learned, including challenges encountered to really tackle the environmental aspects of AMR, but not only the challenges, also those areas of success. We have created as well a database of experts in the regions, so that it is maybe easier to know who to ask certain aspects. And in the Latin American regions, we are starting a mapping exercise. So awareness raising, and what are the things that we are doing in a way. And as you know, this week is next week is very important for the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. And the idea is that we have been preparing different materials that are available there. I think the presentations will be shared, so you can really go in depth if you want to learn a little more on the different things that we are working on. I will not enter into the global plan of action or the strategic framework, because those things have already been addressed by the former speakers. But what I would like to really share is that the tripartite that used to be WHO, FAO, and what used to be OIE, now WOAH, has a new member, which is UNEP. Of course, we have been working together for very long already, but now it's officialized. So we are, the name has changed, and we are now, in a way, being recognized as the Quadripartite for addressing the One Health topic, but also the AMR and the discussions. I will go back a little to the report, the Spotlight report that I mentioned before. And in here, as I indicated, it's still under development. It will be launched early next year, hopefully in the context of one of the meetings of the global leaders groups, the GLG. And what we have so far, and it's available if you'd like to have a closer look, is the summary for policymakers that was launched last February this year. So going into maybe main findings of the reports, and I think that here you will not see any surprises. The main sources of biological and chemical pollutants are part and described in the report. Manufacturing is an issue, but discharges as well. If we go on farms, the use of antimicrobials, the manures, the irrigation, particularly for intensive crop or animal production, is a big challenge and a big issue. We cannot see ourselves separate from the waste aspects and the waste management considerations. We always discuss prevention and not really getting into the waste, but more into the circularity concepts and how to avoid having more and more legacies related to waste. But some things, there is no other possibility, and that might also be closer or related to health care facilities. But in the case of pharmaceuticals, very good collection systems could be in place to really solve that. We have big challenges related to poor sanitation, the sewage systems, and the work with municipalities. And here I'm bringing the other dimension. We talk about the global, the regional, the national, but we also need to go into the local things. Runoffs from intensive use as well, soils already contaminated and waters, considering also that metals can be stressors in the system and can really contribute to or play a very important role in the development and spread of antimicrobial resistance. Chemicals, microorganisms, and genes are associated with AMR, entering into the environment along different pathways. And the pathways I reflected upon are critical for addressing and finding solutions. And going into that, this slide is showing in a way the different types of actions that can be identified to work on the topic and to reduce the environmental risks of AMR in general. You will see there the regular approaches, which is the assessments, identifying the hotspots through life cycle considerations, the influence and the relevance of regulations with standards, with partnerships, with the planning. But mainly maybe one of the biggest challenges that the international community has in this arena is, of course, the financing of certain of the elements or in certain parts of the value chain that we have. So if we think about regulatory changes that are needed and a joint approach, there you will see what type of things can start happening. And that includes international standards, for example, for effluent discharges from pharmaceuticals, from hospitals into water, from standards for big agribusiness to maybe start thinking on different type of approaches for the use of pesticides and fertilizers in farms, the need for national regulatory changes, and that goes hand by hand with the subsidies considerations, while in a way promoting very strongly the engagement with front-runner industry actors that are changing in a voluntary manner and going ahead of any regulatory requirements that are needed. So from my side, key message number one, and repeating the former speakers, AMR is a global challenge, but requires concerted actions and local solutions in many topics, but not only the local things will solve. We need to really recognize it as it has been as an international challenge. And the second big message is that AMR is an issue, is a problem that we have the elements and the tools to solve. Human actions has worsened the AMR problem, but human action can also be the solution and improve it. The burden of AMR can be reduced, solutions exist, and they can be implemented through international commitments, as I was referring to, but also through national actions and through consumer choices as well. We, as organization, as UNEP, as Quadripartite, remain committed to continue working at these different levels, together with you, with the sister organizations, and in here the importance of really transmitting these concepts in the right manner to support implementations and actions for this. We heard before no time to wait, and in here, because we usually also recognize the issue of waste, I am adding to the reflection no time to waste. And with this, I thank you all very much for the opportunity to present the environmental dimensions, aspects of the environmental dimensions of AMR. Over.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for showing the connect between AMR and environment in such simple words, and also stressing that action at local levels is very important. I now invite Thomas Joseph, Head Antimicrobial Stewardship and Awareness Unit, WHO, to share his insights on how AMR is becoming a rising global health threat and causing devastation to human health. Over to you, Thomas.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Shobha. And just to check that you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
And that you can see my slides.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to start by actually, saying that I'm so glad that you organized this media event, because one of the great challenges we have is that, of communicating AMR. It is something that people think of is very complicated, very complex. And, the media has a really important role to simplify the messages, to clarify the messages, to make it common knowledge, to make it common understanding. Just like, in HIV, so much was achieved thanks to the simplification of all the messages that were so complex in the 80s and the 90s. Just like that, we've got to find a way to make AMR something that everybody understands and everybody can do something about. I'm going to try and make a simple presentation with some simple messages, which I think are useful to transfer to audiences across the world. And of course, I'll invite questions at the end, as is for everyone. But the first idea of it being a major threat, it bears repeating that it is now causing more deaths than so many other conditions. 5 million deaths each year are associated with bacterial AMR alone. And, much of this can be attributed to lower respiratory tract infections like pneumonia, which itself accounted for more than 1.5 million deaths in 2019, according to that IHME report. But the important thing here is to also look at how it is distributed. The burden is greatest in low resource settings, particularly sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, which also carries much of the world's burden of communicable diseases. So what does this mean? It means that it's not just a global public health problem, but also an issue of health equity and socio-economic development. It's uneven, just like vaccine availability in the past pandemic was so unevenly distributed across the world. Similarly, the burden of AMR is unevenly distributed, and we've got to take notice of it and got to do something important about it. So I just want to also say that drug resistance does not only affect bacteria or antibiotics, it also affects those medicines that are used in treatment of fungal and parasitic infections, including such things as HIV, which is a virus, so fungal virus and parasitic infections, and malaria, which is a parasite, besides TB and so on. So these are, huge public health problems in the world. The burden of managing these in the world is huge, and we are at risk of losing all the gains we've made in combating these, especially the big three, HIV, malaria, and TB. So what are the other aspects of this? The other aspects are that a person with a drug-resistant infection is much more likely to be sick and absent from work and family commitments, also for longer, requiring more expensive medicines and medical care. So that obviously has major implications on healthcare costs and productivity, both for patients and also their caregivers, But beyond that, it also affects the health system and the national economy. You've heard the numbers about how many trillions of dollars the AMR could cost the world in years to come. And then one more piece of information that you might want to understand is that drug-resistant infections often require the use of second or third line treatments, not the first line treatments, which is commonly available. So these are usually much more expensive, often not available, and certainly not widely available. And these can often cause serious side effects like organ failure. So preventing drug resistance in the first place makes sense. It's better than to get to a stage where you have to use second line, third line drugs. Modern medicine as we know it for the past 100 and so years is dependent on the ability to prevent and treat infections using antibiotics, including during joint replacement surgery, organ transplantation, cancer chemotherapy, and also in the treatment of chronic diseases like asthma and diabetes. So here's the problem. If antibiotics and other antimicrobials lose their effectiveness, we lose the ability not only to treat the infections, but also to manage these other health conditions. So it's really serious, and it's really time the world stood up and took note and decided to do something. So what is it that we can do? Well, first, to understand what drives AMR. It's accelerated. The spread and emergence is accelerated by misuse and overuse of antimicrobials, whether it is to treat or prevent infections in humans, animals, and plants. So antibiotics are definitely life-saving, but they should only be taken when they have been prescribed by a health worker for bacterial infections. And how many countries are we aware of the fact that people go to a pharmacist or are able to get antibiotics without a prescription anytime they want to treat themselves without, really any medical supervision? This is called misuse. And even when people are taking antibiotics, for no good reason, the overuse of that can lead to antimicrobial resistance. So unnecessary exposure to antibiotics when they are not caused by bacteria. So for example, like colds and flus, even for example, COVID, where so many people have used antibiotics when it was not indicated by a bacterial infection, co-indicated, it allows antibiotic-resistant strains to develop. And it's really important that we spread this message. The antibiotics are there for bacterial infections alone, not for any and every cough and cold and fever. So therefore, not all people with common infections in the community should routinely receive antibiotics. In many cases, infections may be caused by these viruses, which do not respond to antibiotics. Another issue that is really important, and I really would like us to address, and it was referred to by UNEP previously, which is that every year, hundreds of millions of cases of diarrhea in humans are treated with antimicrobials. But the reason for the diarrhea is because of lack of access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. If we had universal access to clean water, to sanitation and hygiene, antimicrobial use could reduce by 60% for these cases of diarrhea alone. So this is really important. The access, the universal health coverage, the good infection prevention and control, good behaviors such as hand washing, vaccination, all these are vital in the fight against AMR. And this is something that all of us can do. These measures reduce the likelihood of infection in the first place so that antibiotics don't need to be used. The infographic on the right basically says that more than 2 billion people even today, and that is a quarter of the world. Yesterday or day before, we passed the 8 billion mark in population globally. So 1/4 of the world's people still use a contaminated drinking water source in the 21st century. 2 billion people still do not have basic sanitation facilities. Excreta and wastewater from 60% of the population, more than half the population of the world, are not safely managed. So this is really, really, really critical. And the worst of it is that even for physicians, even for prescribers, often they use antibiotics as a substitute for infrastructure, care, and hygiene. When they know that infections may not be prevented in the space in which they are treating patients, when they know that good hygiene is not possible, there's no clean water, they tend to use antibiotics to make sure that the patient does not suffer, but that's not really the way it should be done. The other factors facilitating the spread of AMR include poor access to quality, affordable medicines, vaccines, and diagnostics. So if there are medicines in the world that can save lives and are required for particular infections, for particular conditions, and if one doesn't have them, there is no option but to try and do something else, use a substitute which is not as effective or not indicated, to try it. And so access to the best medicines globally across the world is really a critical issue and something that we need to really think about, but also to get new medicines, to make sure that we are developing new antibiotics. Coupled with that is lack of awareness and knowledge about AMR. And it's not just the public, it's not just, it's also the prescribers, it's also the physicians. There's a huge need to increase training, especially in-service training and pre-service training for all cadres of healthcare workers to increase and improve their understanding of antibiotic use. There's also a lack of legislation and regulation. And if there is legislation or regulation, often the problem is there is a lack of enforcement, which is why this over-the-counter use of antibiotics in so many countries is so widespread, despite there being laws against it. But I think so that's really something that we need to turn our attention to. And finally, I think Haile mentioned this, there's huge, increasingly complex human and animal movement, international travel, migration, and trade, and these also add to it. So what are we in WHO doing about it, especially the stuff that I manage and support in the organization? Obviously, WHO is a huge organization doing a lot of things, but let me speak to just a couple of things. One is working on antimicrobial stewardship. And in this area, what we've done is in the past 2 or 3 years, we've produced 2 guidance documents. The first is the WHO policy guidance on integrated antimicrobial stewardship activities. And the second for use at the national and subnational level. And the second is the antimicrobial stewardship programs in healthcare facilities in low and middle income countries, a practical toolkit. So that's at the facility level. If you're in the hospital or health center, then what do you need to do to preserve the antimicrobials? It's all about preserving the efficacy of the antimicrobials. I don't want to go into this in detail, but I will just tell you that it is an integrated programmatic approach to preserving antimicrobials to make sure that they continue to work for us, that when we are sick, we can take them and know that we will get well and that we are not that our pathogens are not resistant to them. And it's basically talking about 5 pillars, broad pillars that work together to support good stewardship of antimicrobials. And the first is around governance, to establish and develop national coordination mechanisms and to allow those mechanisms to create the guidelines, whether those are treatment guidelines, whether they are other standards, implementation tools, essential medicines lists, or whatever it is that governments need to do to ensure that across the country, they have the wherewithal to support good stewardship. The second is to ensure access, which I just talked about, and regulation, which also I talked about, of antimicrobials, to make sure we don't assume that what we have is adequate, to check the system and make sure that we are constantly improving, whether it is from the supply side by enforcement and penalties, or whether it's on the demand side by regulating social triggers, remuneration policies that promote good behaviors in prescribing and dispensing. The third is about awareness, education, and training. Again, I spoke about it, but really this needs to fuel behavioral change across every actor, whether it's the physician, whether it's the prescriber, whether it's the policymaker, whether it's the public. All of them need to understand how can we better manage our antimicrobials. And fourth is the whole infrastructure and the prevention aspects by strengthening water, sanitation, hygiene, by strengthening infection prevention and control at the healthcare facility level, especially, but also at the community level, and then implementing and supporting vaccination programs across the world. And finally, the fifth pillar is about surveillance, monitoring, and evaluation. We need to constantly know, how are we doing? How is antimicrobial use and consumption? What are the trends? Is it increasing? Is it reducing? Where are the trends? How are the trends affecting global use and so on? And surveillance of antimicrobial resistance itself. And finally, of course, whatever we are doing across this integrated spectrum, we need to constantly monitor and evaluate it. And I just want to say that both the guidance documents contain tools for national and facility level assessment. So it's very easy for a group of people, very, very easy really, to look at that tool and to quickly assess, how are we doing at the country level? How are we doing at the facility level? You can then identify the gaps very quickly, prioritize what you need to do, and then work on those priorities to support what would be better stewardship. The second area that I want to talk to you is about awareness raising. I know that Fallon will be talking from FAO, will be talking later on WOAH, but I just want to say that we're also working together on broader awareness raising. And the important thing is we had 2 global meetings to discuss what should be the priorities for AMR awareness raising. And of course, besides what I said to you about the fact that we need to really simplify, we need to really make sure that things are easy to understand and clear, not confusing. But besides that, what was interesting was that there was global consensus that the 3 top priority audiences that needed to receive messages in this simplified form were children, students, and youth. That means young people, the generations that will form new behaviors to antimicrobials. Media, which is all of you, and I'm so delighted that so many of you are here. I hope you will really take this message across the world. And third was parliamentarians and policymakers, because we have to find ways to really influence legislation, regulation, and enforcement. And the second thing that I'd like to share with you about those consultations was that, it was clear that because there are so many different agencies working on AMR, there are so many different languages, or so many different messages coming in so many different ways. And one of the things that there was consensus about was the need to forge common language, common messaging, engaging the target audiences more directly, focusing on the basics of AMR, not trying to get into too much of the peripheral or rather sophisticated stuff on the sides, but just ensuring that behavior change can happen with a clear understanding, insisting and ensuring this consistency, clarity of messages. I'm really happy that the Quadripartite together have agreed and have already started working on and have developed common language and common messaging and so many other things together in just a few months. And I'm sure we'll do much more in the months to come. So what can people do? What can you do is what can not just you, but what can the people that you speak to or write to, what can they do? It is important that everyone should have a basic knowledge and understanding of AMR, because each one is affected by it, each one can contribute to it, so that they can play their part in minimizing its emergence and spread. And the kinds of things are simple. It's not complicated. What do we need to do? We learned how important hand washing was in the COVID pandemic. We need to stick with that. We need to ensure that we continue to work on personal hygiene and make sure that we sneeze in the right way. We don't, sneeze in other people's faces and so on. We need to ensure that food is prepared safely so we don't contaminate our food. We need to ensure that we minimize close contact with others when they are sick, keep up to date with our vaccinations, and continue to practice safe sex. So these are really simple messages, but it has the potential to have incredibly huge impact on the increase and spread of AMR. But also, if people do get sick, what should they do? And this is really important. This is about behavior change, because often people are still, using antimicrobials like they should not, by themselves, without consultation, not for the right duration, not in the right dose, etc., all of which adds to the spread of AMR. So they should only use antimicrobials when prescribed by a health worker. They should not use leftover antimicrobials. They should not share it. They should not dispose of antimicrobials in the toilet, in the sink, or wastewater, because as you heard from UNEP, these then go into the environment. And we really need to ensure that these simple messages are messages that we embrace and that we practice so that AMR can be reduced as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas, for such an excellent presentation as always, and also for emphasizing on the importance of prevention and access to basic hygiene to control AMR, something which very often we try to overlook or miss. We now have with us Delfy Gochez, Data Management Officer, AMR and Veterinary Products Department at World Organization for Animal Health, to talk about the important issue of AMR and animal health. Over to you, Delfy.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen and I will kindly ask you just to confirm that you are able to see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting us to this very important activity. We do believe that this is very important because journalists, you are the ones talking to the people, while sometimes we come to technical and we are probably diluting the idea, or people are not really understanding what we are doing. So basically my presentation here will be based on some ideas of what is outside regarding the animal health sector and its contribution to AMR. So basically I will do a little bit different of what my other colleagues have been done, because I know my colleague Jane from WOAH, she will be covering mainly of the activities of the organization. And I will be mainly going exactly on some key messages that we would like that are either changed or better explained to the public, especially the next week that is coming for the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. First, what I would like to just share very briefly is what is an antimicrobial, because I just wanted to come to very basic things that when we are talking to the public, what is an antimicrobial? And maybe just to let you know, in a couple of years, we'll have 100 years since Alexander Fleming discovered for the first time the first antibacterial based in penicillium. So we are having almost 100 years since we discovered this, and this has dramatically changed the lives of human beings and the way we are interacting and living right now. I also want to comment here. Sorry, it's not, yeah, thank you. So some years later, the first sulfonamide and first commercial antibiotic was proposed to the public. And some years just before the World War II, René Dubois was discovered gramidacin that was able to treat wounds and ulcers. So my information from here is that antimicrobials allow us as humans to improve our life expectancy, but also for animals, we can treat diseases and improve animal and welfare. But there is a common understanding from the quadripartite now of what is an antimicrobial. And they are useful to prevent, control, and treat infection diseases, not only in humans, but also animals and plants. And what I wanted to come here, because usually there's a misunderstanding for the public of what is an antimicrobial and what is AMR. And in my second slide here, I just went to a meeting last week, and they were talking about the psychological impact of what people understand about what is AMR, and was very curious because there was one of these presentations and talking to the people when you publish a journal or an article, people might completely understand different things of what is AMR. And one of the curious things that I discovered last week is people sometimes believe that antimicrobials and resistance is because humans or animals become resistant, like me as a human, I become resistant to the antibiotic, or that the drugs are becoming resistant itself because they are not working anymore. And I just want to add that when you are talking to the people, there are some basic ideas that you might need to come back to them. And what is antimicrobial resistance? And this is basically that is bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites that do not longer respond to the treatment because inside they are becoming resistant to the antibiotics, but it's not a human, it's not an animal that is becoming itself resistant. But here is just an example that how we interact We can see here the environment, plants and humans interacting, and how we can share sometimes the same bacteria in all our system, and how we interact, how we provide manure, how we waste water, how we use antimicrobials, how we interact with animals, with pets even. This is very important to understand the antimicrobial resistance and how we interact and we share these antimicrobials among us. So which type of data we do collect at the organization so far from FAO, and this was already explained by my other colleagues, they are collecting, and they will publish this in next year, data on AMR in animals and plants. From WHO, we have AMR in humans and AMU in humans as well. And from our side, what we could do collect is antimicrobial use in animals. And we just came up with a name that was revealed this year after many years, is Animus. So I will just talk a little bit about Animus, and then I will provide some of the facts and myths that are going around the use of antimicrobials in animals. So what is Animus? This is one of the maps that we published this year in the 6th annual report. And all countries that you can see in this world map that are in green are the countries that actually participated in the round. We are one of the most comprehensive global data collections about the topic of AMR, or AMU in this case. And all countries that you saw in gray are the ones that did not participate in our global data collection. Animus stands for Animal Antimicrobial Use, and we call it Animus Global Database. It started in October 2015, so we are already in the 8th round of data collection. And for your information, from 182 WOAH members that we have, around 150 to 160 members participate each year during our round. So this is very, very, like really, the veterinary services and animal health sector are really contributing because they want to let us know what they are doing, what are the tracks, what are the trends that they are collecting, and because they also want to understand what is going on in their countries to take decisions. We have already published 6 reports. This is aggregated at global and regional level. You might be wondering, where is the country data? So we do not publish this information so far. However, there is a section in our report, is section 11, where we to put the links of the national information for the countries. And we are planning that with Animus because we just launched an IT portal this year. And we hope that in the upcoming years, countries will be having their decision and they will be the ones deciding whether they like to make their data publicly available or not in Animus. But this is the data that we are having. So I'm going to talk about some myths and facts of what is going on about the data that we are collecting and how these have been so far described in the media. So one of the things that I would like to talk first is about the growth hormone. I know this is a very critical point and very controversial, but I want to explain the basics. What is a growth hormone? So basically growth hormone, and this is the definition that we have in our international standards from the organization, from WOAH. It's been approved for all our members. And this is the administration of antimicrobial agents to animals only for the purpose to increase the weight or the efficiency of feed utilization. So we can see here we have a chicken, and then this chicken becomes bigger and bigger. And just for your information, when countries or a farmer or someone is using growth hormone, it's usually it's being given to the animals since the first day of this animal was birthed until they die. And it's very small doses, not therapeutic doses, meaning not to treat diseases in the animal. But I want to address also what is not growth hormone. So it's not growth hormone when we are treating diseases in animals, meaning that an animal is visible sick. So you can see the signs of a disease in the animal. So we treat these animals. There's also for controlling diseases. Usually we have 2 groups of animals. One group is sick and it's different from humans, but in animals, you have a very large numbers of animals in a farm. You know that a group is sick and another one might not be already showing signs of diseases, but is sick. So you need to put antibiotics into the animals. You need to treat them. So usually we use the word control. And then we have prevention. in the prevention, what is not growth hormone, because sometimes it's a misunderstanding of what is prevention and what is growth hormone. So prevention means that these animals are not showing diseases, a sign of diseases yet, but if you do not treat the animals will become sick soon or later. So this is the definition that we have for prevention. So the most important here is that if we are not administering antimicrobial agents to these animals because they are of risk of acquiring an infection, then they will become sick eventually. Then prevention is not to compensate poor husbandry practices. So we are not promoting that, that's for sure. And prevention is also used in humans, just for information, as usually known as prophylaxis. Also, what I want to show here is one of the figures that we have globally. This is from 157 countries from 2020 in the 6th annual report. And you can see here 69% of the countries from these 157 are not using growth motion. So it's around 1/4 of the countries, and this is basically focusing some regions, for example, in Americas and Asia, that are using growth motion. And already we know countries are tackling this. They are doing legislation is going little by little. They are phasing out growth motion at the global level. Sometimes it's not that easy, but this is the global situation. So I just want to that we understand what is a growth motion, what is not growth motion. But most of the countries are not using growth motion. And please, when it goes to the media, prevention is not growth motion. There I wanted to put here some of myth and facts. We have seen from the organization, sometimes there is these type of sentences that are going out. For example, this one. Globally, approximately 80% of the total consumptions of medically important antibiotics are used in the animal sector. Well, this is one of the myths that are going out, and many publications, many articles are using it. And one of the facts, well, this is based in the United States. Only. We cannot extrapolate this to the whole world. This was from an FDA report from 2017. And they even made a statement here because they saw that this was used globally, and they made a statement saying, well, you need to be careful because this is only based on sales. This is not the real consumption of animals, and it was based in 2017. And also they were taking precautions and saying, when you understand this type of information, please do not compare only the totals of what is being sold against to humans, because you are not considering what we usually call the denominator, meaning we are using antimicrobials because there are some animals that are at risk of a disease, and they need to be treated with antimicrobials. And for sure, you need to take into account the numbers of animals that are there, the weight of the animals. And this is what I'm going to address in my next slide here. That you need to take into consideration if ever you are writing an article and you want to compare, for example, the use of antimicrobials against humans, or the use of antimicrobials of country X against country A. You need to remember that you cannot just compare the quantities, because the numbers of animals that are in the country, the type of productions that are in the country are completely different, and the reality of the countries are different. So to compare the data against sectors or against countries, what we usually have is a denominator, meaning, okay, you are using antibiotics because there is some patients that they need it. In our case, what we call this denominator is the animal biomass, which is usually the numbers of animals that are there. We take into account the weight of the animals. So you can see here, I just put an example of the weight of a human being is around 62 kilograms, and while the average of a cow is 500 kilograms. So for sure, when you're applying antimicrobials to a cow, it's completely different, because for every patient that you need to put antibiotics, you need to consider the body weight of the animals, the age, the species of the patient. And as you know, in the animal health sector, we do not only account for the humans, but we have cattle, we have pigs, fish, companion animals, we have chicken, etc. And usually these populations are larger than the human side. So this just is to consider that we cannot just take the pure sales of antimicrobials and completely compare to the sales of that is going on in humans without considering this denominator. Then I wanted to say again, because we are considering 80% of the total consumption, okay, this is happening in the United States, but what's going outside? We know that, for example, in the European Union, from the Jacqueline report from 2017, this is regarding the sales, the food producing animal sector was 60%, while in the humans was 38% for the total sales. But again, we cannot compare these two estimates and we say, oh, the food producing animals are using more, because as I was saying, we need to consider the animal populations that are there. For sure, there are more animals than humans. And here, maybe just to graphically seeing it, we have here the antimicrobial agents. That's how we do the calculations at WOAH. This is the milligrams per kilogram. So we have the animal biomass here. And basically, this is just a division that we do. For sure, there are some mathematical calculations here to obtain the animal biomass, which is described in our report. But we just invite you to understand and to take a look at a little bit of what we are doing about this. So when you write these articles, just be attentive about this. Then there's another myth that we have seen is the animal sector keeps increasing the use of antimicrobials that are highest critically important for humans. So we have seen from 2016 to 2018, from our reports, we observe a decrease of 27% of the milligrams per kilograms at a global level. But also, we saw that the Jacqueline report from Europe made an analysis against the consumption in humans. So I will just present you here the graph of what is going on. And basically here on your left, what you have is the Jacqueline report. They were able to do this analysis between animals and humans, because here they are not only considering the sales, but what I was telling you, the denominator. So when we are considering this, and this is the milligrams per kilograms of animal biomass, and you can see that the animal sector was keep decreasing. So actually, the animal sector is decreasing. And when we see here at the global level, we do not have the estimations for the human sector, but this is only about the animal sector. We did this analysis in 78 countries, and you can see the decrease. It was a decrease of 27% in this period. And we are going to see that for the upcoming years already. And then for when I keep this myth, because the other part is saying, well, you are using the highest critically important antimicrobials that are for humans. Well, from the 23 antimicrobial classes that WOAH is actually collecting, only 5 classes are the highest critically important for humans. And they account for less than 20% of the total amounts intended for use in animals. Here's just an example, because sometimes we have these conversations with journalists in the past, and we're saying, why are you using tetracyclines so much? And there was a confusion from the journalists thinking that tetracyclines are one of the highest critically important for humans. And here what I have put is in, I have these arrows in red, which are the classes for critically important in humans. And maybe just here for polypeptides, you might see this is account for 7.3%. But here we are only talking about colistin or polymyxins. It's a subcategory of polypeptides. So here we are accounting for more. It's more, even more molecules than only colistin. So it might be even less of what we are saying here of the 20% of antimicrobials. Then why, maybe just to answer already, why we are using so much of tetracyclines? Well, tetracyclines have been used many years for the animal health sector. Is one of the cheapest, usually used a lot for least developed or low and middle income countries, because it might be the only available antimicrobial in this type of country. So that's why we are usually seeing a very high use of tetracycline in these countries. Well, my final here message will be basically from antimicrobial use, from data to action, because usually this is the path that we have seen from the countries. Antimicrobials are being used. Usually it's the veterinary services that are collecting this type of data. They do provide this data to WOAH in Animus. Also, they collect information on the animal population, so this is our denominator. And they also provide this information to WOAH through a program that is called WAAH. However, most of the data so far, and that's something that we would like to change, is that countries are reporting the data, but what we want is that they actually analyze the data, that they actually take decisions, make legislations, and take actions that can tackle AMR in their countries. What we are doing so far with Animus, that was launched this year, is that we are creating a lot of data visuals for them so they can take initiatives. We just had several workshops the couple of weeks ago, and in the upcoming months, we are going to cover the other regions of the world, but we started with Africa, is that we want them to have all the tools or the necessary information so they actually can take that information and share it at a One Health approach in their countries, because we know they are parts of these national action plans of AMR in their countries. So we want them is to take this type of information and they actually take decisions at a national level, not only from their sector, but they see their counterparts and they can take decisions. So this is basically what I wanted to say right now. I was saying is different from the others, but this is an excellent opportunity for us because usually we don't have such a big group from journalists, but we wanted to tackle all these messages for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Delfy, for bursting many myths around animal health and focusing on how AMR is affecting our animal health, which in turn is impacting human health. We now open for questions and comments from the participants. We already have many questions, and I will not be able to take up all of them. So I would request the panelists that if any question is left unanswered, if they could please type in the answers in the Q&A box. But definitely we will take a few questions. There is a question for Junxia from Nahid Khalid, that what can farmers and agriculturists do to raise awareness of their role in helping prevent AMR? Also, use of medicines in food is less regulated by government than medicines for human health are regulated. Any insight? If Junxia is there, can she answer? Okay, there is a question for Dr. Jacqueline from Noni Thong Prasaret from Thailand. She says that are antimicrobials in the environment also impacting animals? Do they also get sick with drug-resistant diseases? Here in Thailand, we had drug-resistant malaria in border areas with Myanmar. Not sure if there was any environment connect in this.
Thank you very much for the question. And yes, there is a link, particularly through the genes, but also through the animals to the people and through the meat production, for example. But we can provide more information and details if needed. I think you will be sharing our contact details so that we can provide on the topics.
Yes, thank you. We will be sharing the if the panelists agree to it, consent, we will share your contact details with the journalists so that they can satisfy their questions and answers. There is a question for Thomas by Brendan Darby from Ahmedabad Mirror, India. He says, as you rightly mentioned, over-the-counter sale medication remains a great cause of concern, especially in India. However, even as the government is carrying out awareness activities, and health reporters across organizations have been spreading the word, public interest in changing long-formed habits remains low. Self-medication remains unabated with little to no regulation on the sale of antibiotics. Are these just teething problems in awareness drives, or are we doing something wrong? Is there any sort of impact assessment of AMR messaging?
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that question, Brendan. And I think you've identified the problem and, in a sense, answered some of it yourself, which is it's a really complicated thing. I think India is a really good example where there is legislation. And in fact, the government, if I remember correctly, at some point introduced the red line labeling of antibiotics so that people could immediately know that what they were given was an antibiotic and therefore needed to be handled with care. And there was a campaign around that. I'm not sure, however, I'm not sure because I haven't seen any impact data. How much has that initiative, how much did the Red Line Initiative contribute to reduced antibiotic use, reduced over-the-counter use, and so on? I have to say, though, that all of this is very new. You know, if you look at HIV, you know, it's been about 40 years now, almost 35 years for sure. And, you know, the progress of communications, awareness, etc., has been huge, especially after the first decade. And we are still in our first decade, in the first 5 years, really, you know, of working on antimicrobial resistance in any systematic way across the world. In many countries, they haven't even started yet. So it's really early days. The first global consultation was held in July 2022. So I think the agenda is important. We need to have the agenda you mentioned. We need to check what sort of awareness should be given to what sort of audiences. How do we make sure that they are segmented and targeted so that they make sense? And just to say that, you know, we are also developing a research agenda in human health in WHO, and also coordinating a research agenda for One Health on AMR. And in both these, I would be very happy, I would be very keen, and I will be pushing for the inclusion of the question you asked. What is the impact of specific AMR and how do of AMR in awareness initiatives, and how do we measure it? We also, just to conclude, we also know that awareness is a necessary but insufficient condition for behavior change. So, you know, just like with smoking, everybody knows smoking is bad for health, but it doesn't stop people from smoking. And similarly, you know, the fact that we know about AMR is not enough to make people change behavior. So AMR is only one step, but we need to also look at the behavioral drivers that push people to persist with bad use, with misuse. So thank you for that question. And yes, it's a very important one that needs to be addressed.
There is another question for you, Thomas. Dede Aditama says, is AMR and One Health now part of the climate treaty agenda at UNFCCC COP27 was going on recently with the leaders?
Okay, thank you for that question. I think I'll ask Jackie to address it because I'm not really conversant with it.
Yes, can you please repeat? I lost internet for a few seconds.
Yes. The question is that, is AMR and One Health now part of the climate treaty agenda? We recently had COP27. So is it part of the agenda of the climate treaty, AMR and One Health?
So not exactly, but it has been recognized as the interactions between climate and AMR and climate are strongly linked. We cannot hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. There is a comment from Chhatra Karki, founding president of Nepal Forum of Science Journalists, that AMR could trigger the next health crisis in developing countries like Nepal, as 79% people buy antibiotics over the counter, the same problem here. And then the effective measures to prevent such upcoming health crisis. I think Thomas has outlined them. Then Rita Vidyadana, journalist from Indonesia, says, since majority of developing countries still lack adequate infrastructure and access to clean water, clean environment, how can we expect them to reduce the use of antibiotics? And some health providers feel it easy to prescribe antibiotics for patients who do not actually need such medication. What are your views on this? Would any of the panelists like to answer that?
I can start, and maybe Jacqueline can add. But, you know, I think this is exactly what I was trying to communicate, you know, that to prevent the use of antimicrobials, we need to first prevent the infection. The way to prevent the infection is to, consume clean water. We all know if you take dirty water from a swamp, you're going to get sick, and it's just degrees of dirtiness that you can see or not see in contaminated water sources. Similarly, we need to keep our bodies clean. We need to wash our hands. We need to make sure we don't pass on germs to others. This is, common knowledge. But now the question is, how do we practice it? How do we practice it where in health facilities, in rural areas, in many countries, there is not even a source for clean water. There is not even a toilet. How are the people in those areas expected to practice the kind of hygiene without the availability of safe water, without the availability of sanitation facilities? It is very, very difficult. And so it is really critical that when we talk about AMR, we don't keep it as a medical problem between patients and physicians. And drugs and bugs. We need to look at what else is causing AMR, what else is driving it. And as this journalist has rightly pointed out, the lack of facilities, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of clean water is very, very, very critical. That's why it is one of the 5 pillars of the stewardship model that WHO is promoting. And that is why we encourage governments to invest in infrastructure, in a sense to improve not just the overall infrastructure for clean water and sanitation and hygiene, but also within hospitals. The health system needs to be better supported to develop what the tools it requires. This is also why, as Dr. Getahun had said, the SDGs are compromised, not just one SDG, but several SDGs are compromised, and it's all linked and it's all interconnected. And that is ultimately why we need the One Health approach, cutting across environment, animal health, foods, security, and human health, so that we can work together. But in the end, the investments by governments, the realities of the infrastructure will be what transforms and improves what goes on in the world. So this message, I would hope you will also communicate in your publications. Jackie, I don't know whether you want to add.
No, I think your answer is very comprehensive, and we need systemic approaches and many things that will help avoid antimicrobial resistant generation and spread and transmission are also basic issues related to hygiene, to waste management, to the different practices that we tend to repeat once and again. And sometimes if we look back into the past, many of those things were prevented through the practices that Asian people were doing, and they are very simple. So sometimes, and I will address again the issue of consumption of things. Sometimes we believe that using more, it's better, and in reality, it is not. So there are a huge amount of misconceptions around it, but this doesn't preclude us to really invest or find ways to invest in infrastructure and facilities. That is a must. The open defecation as well is one of the biggest issues around the world, and changing cultural issues is not simple. It is beyond sometimes the productions or the intensity of food production or the way we really do things, but it's also the practices we have. So we need systemic approaches. We need the One Health thinking around it, and there will be no solutions if we are coming from one end. We need to really address it from all angles. And I would like, maybe if you allow me very quickly, to also say that AMR, of course, we all know it's very related to biodiversity. And this year in December, we will have the conference of biodiversity, the CBD, biodiversity, of the biological diversity, adopting a framework which is called the post-2020 framework. And one of the big elements in there is the relationship between AMR and the ecosystems. So it is a huge step towards awareness. So it is the climate as one of the pillars, the biodiversity as the other one, and the pollution needs to be seen together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. There is a question for Delfy from Elvis Chamagre. Can antimicrobials used in animal growth affect human health?
Yes. Well, the answer is yes, but it's not only the growth motion part. Is any use of antimicrobials that we are using is also promoting antimicrobial resistance. For sure, what we want to promote from countries is that they phase out growth motion. We have seen that countries, especially in the Americas, they've been phasing out the use of colistin. A couple of years ago, there were around 12 countries saying they were using that, while now it's 4. So we know there have been some improvements. Every time they come with any legislation, they let us know. Also, what we want is that they do not use growth motion without risk analysis in the country, which is very complicated. It's not that easy. It's not just a word, it's not just a paper. It's really taking a lot of actions in the country to actually say, okay, we are using this, but this is not having any repercussions in human health. We don't want them to keep using the first treatment as a first treatment line, the critically important antimicrobials for humans. So yes, it is contributing to antimicrobial resistance, but what we want from countries is to develop all these guidelines, to give them all the tools and understanding, because the information that you saw that I presented, what is a growth motion, what is prevention, sometimes we need to repeat it also to the countries, and that they are able to understand and to differentiate what is growth motion and what is not. And for sure to address this when there is no legislation, because sometimes when we go to, especially to countries that are not very well advanced in the infrastructure of legislation for veterinary products, they don't have any legislation, any guidelines in the country on how to use antimicrobials. So that's something that we want to also to address with them.
Thank you very much. And we now move on to the third and last session of the day, in which our experts will share the regional and country perspectives from Africa and Asia on One Health and AMR. I firstly invite Fallon, Bwatu, Mbuyi. I'm sorry for the wrong pronunciation. I'm sure I'm pronouncing it wrong. She's communication specialist at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, to tell us about the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week that is held every year during November 18 to 24. Over to you, Fallon.
Thank you. Yes, and my name is Fallon Mbuyi, but you were almost there. So I will just share my screen now. Please tell me if you can see it.
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay. All right. So yes, I'm happy to present World Antimicrobial Awareness Week on behalf of the Quadripartite Awareness team. So I think I've seen also in the Q&A box a lot of questions about what can we actually do to tackle AMR, and I think World Antimicrobial Awareness Week is really a great opportunity to raise awareness about AMR and also to promote a prudent use of antimicrobials, because we know that antimicrobials are very important and we need to preserve the effectiveness of these antimicrobials, but also we need to really promote a prudent use. So that's why we organize every year from the 18th to the 24th of November World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. We call it WOAH. And the slogan remains every year, handle antimicrobials with care. But this year's theme is different, and we have the 2020 theme is preventing antimicrobial resistance together. So I think from the previous presentations, we all have agreed that AMR is a threat to humans, animal, plants, and in the environment, and it affects all of us. So that's why this year we really call for cross-sectoral collaboration to really preserve the efficacy of antimicrobials. And really to curb antimicrobial resistance effectively, all sector really needs to work together and to adopt preventive measures. That's why the team is really, there's a focus on prevention, but also on working together. I think also some of the previous presentation have already mentioned what can be these preventive measures. we can talk about strengthening infection prevention, but also ensuring access to clean water, sanitation, and hygiene, and vaccines, of course, and also implement best practices in food and agriculture productions, like really having proper biosecurity measures, and also minimize pollution and ensure proper waste and sanitation management. Also, I think it was also mentioned that really working together as a quadripartite, we came together in March. We went from being a tripartite to a quadripartite, and also that's why we also wanted to put a focus on together, because it's not only the quadripartite that has to work together, but all One Health actors to really make sure that we keep antimicrobials working. So, what can you expect from us on what can you already, where can you find proper communication material to support the campaign? So together with the quadripartite, we have developed a campaign guide. In the campaign guide, you really find more background information on antimicrobial resistance, but then also you will find a lot of key facts and figures, key messages that you can also use to communicate effectively with the general public. You will also find the link to our Trello board where you find all the visuals needed, like it goes from the stamp, but also social media cards. And also there are a lot of good tips on how can you effectively raise awareness. We really are happy that to say that we have translated this campaign guide in the 5 UN languages. So you will find all the information in French, English, Spanish, Arabic, Chinese, and Russian. And that's really something that was a joint effort of the quadripartite team. Another important aspect of the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week campaign is the Go Blue for AMR. We started it actually 2 years ago, more at regional level as a pilot, and last year it was really at global level. And the main reason behind this Go Blue for AMR campaign is really to go a little bit more back to the basic and make AMR accessible to a general public. I think a lot of questions were raised about how can we make it more accessible? How can we make it more simple? And so this color campaign is really an easy way to spark a conversation. So we invite all of you to wear blue during the week, but also to post pictures, and that can really drive the traffic and also create like a global conversation on AMR. And lastly, I think also that's something that Thomas mentioned. This is the first year that as a quadripartite, we agreed on some of the common messages. A lot of during the global consultation that was organized in July, some of the messages that we received was really that we want to have really simple message that are really easy to communicate to the general public. And that's why together with the quadripartite, we have agreed on at least already 2 common use terms about antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance. And also these information are available in the campaign guide, but also on our Trello board. After the presentation, I will put the link to our quadripartite Trello board where you can find all this information. And that was also a great opportunity for us to also create a social media campaign. So you will find there also all the social media cards also translated in the 5 UN languages to really make sure that we can reach different audiences and that the message is really clearly understood. So yes, so we will really invite you to join the campaign starting from the 18th of November. This Friday, we have already a major event organized by the quadripartite. This was also already mentioned by Junxia. So we have the launch of the AMR multi-stakeholder partnership platform. It's really the aim of this platform is really to bring stakeholders together to really come up with, to share information, but also to come up with specific action to tackle AMR. So that will happen on the 18th, and there you will have a little bit more information about really the partnership platform. And then of course, next week we have the AMR awareness raising priorities webinar. So we will have 2 dates. And it's really to share the findings of the global consultation that was organized in July this year. I think Thomas also mentioned already that one of the key audiences identified was the media. So I think this event is already important to also connect with all of you and to make sure that you understand the different aspects of AMR and also to continue this conversation. So I think the webinar will be also really useful to understand a little bit more, to have a little bit more background information on what has been discussed. So really, finally, I think like if you have any more questions, these are our email addresses. You can also just, if you are planning to organize an event, another media lunch, please let us know. We will be happy to also put all these events on our website. Like I mentioned, I will put the link to our Trello board where you will find all this information. And really feel free to share with us like any initiative that you are planning to organize. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fallon. We now have Jane Lwoyero, Technical Officer on AMR at World Organization for Animal Health, who will share the perspective of African region. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Oh, sorry. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Thank you. Good greetings to all of you, wherever you are. I'm going to share with you certain perspectives of the current and future work on AMR by the World Organization for Animal Health in Africa. So as a background, we just want to re-emphasize that WOAH work on AMR is guided by the OI strategy on antimicrobial resistance and the prudent use of antimicrobials. And this is because this is a document that was developed before we rebranded to our new name, WOAH. So it retains the initial name. So under this strategy, we look forward to improving awareness and understanding of AMR and its risks. We also have an objective to strengthen knowledge through surveillance and research. Our third objective of the strategy is to support good governance and capacity building. And this is specifically in areas of development and use of standards and good practices. And then we also encourage the implementation of international standards to improve animal health and welfare. So as part of improving awareness and understanding of AMR and its risk, the WOAH in Africa is supporting and has been disseminating AMR targeted communications and advocacy materials to member countries and to stakeholders in the animal health arena. And we also support the continuous professional development for veterinarians and the veterinary paraprofessionals to promote the prudent use of antimicrobials. And this is because we understand that these are the frontline workers in animal health and they work with farmers, and therefore their knowledge is able, when they have good knowledge on antimicrobial resistance and how to mitigate against it, they are better placed at sharing this information with farmers in the course of their work. We have also been part of the development of the communication and stakeholder engagement strategy at country levels, and a case in time is Ethiopia. So as part of improving this awareness and understanding, WOAH has developed communication material for specific target audiences. And as you can see, we have samples where we are targeting pharmaceutical industry, the veterinary authority, and animal feed manufacturers and suppliers. All these towards enhancing them in the knowledge that they all have a role to play in mitigating against antimicrobial resistance. We've also been disseminating farm biosecurity guidelines, and these are specifically measures that are supposed to enhance the and reduce the entry of diseases and disease-causing organisms into and from and within farms, so that they are not circulating and spread from one farm to the other. We encourage the farmers to enhance their biosecurity systems and hygiene so that they can raise their animals without the need to use antimicrobials unless the animals get sick. We are also contributing to the AMR communication and advocacy strategy for Africa, and this is work done in collaboration with our quadripartite colleagues and Africa Union and Africa CDC. And together as a quadripartite in Africa and working with Africa Union and Africa CDC, we are also marking the World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. So this is our poster for the event starting on the 18th for WOAH in Africa, and to enhance the message of why we need to safeguard antimicrobials in Africa, both in human, animal environment, and crops production in the continent. In a bid to strengthen knowledge on research and surveillance, we are supporting countries in the continent to collect data on the antimicrobials they are using in both terrestrial and aquatic food producing animals. These are animals on land and animals in the waters where antimicrobials have been used in the treatment of diseases. We are also have participated in the training for our focal points, as Delfy had mentioned, to embrace the collection of these antimicrobial use data using the new software that has just been developed. And also we train these focal points not only on antimicrobial data collection, but also on other relevant topics that help them in their work as in the veterinary products arena. We continue to support countries in their development and implementation of monitoring and surveillance systems, and this is specifically for the antimicrobial use, and also work with countries during the reporting on the progress of their implementation of national action plans that was mentioned by WHO on tracks. And for WOAH, we are also looking forward to having countries report farm level use of antimicrobials and have also antimicrobial resistant data collected at the same level. And for these, we have projects in specific countries to pilot the farm level antimicrobial use data collection. At the same time, the substandard and falsified drugs are a concern for WOAH, because we know these are some of the drugs that enhance the development of resistance, and it is important that this work is done so that the countries can be able to have good quality veterinary medicines that can be used for treatment of animal diseases. And this work is in pilot, and the end objective is that we have an information and an alert system for substandard and falsified veterinary products. The work is still ongoing. We are also supporting the veterinary professionals on training them on how to use the guidelines that has been developed for them to be able to use them in their work. At the same time, disseminating and encouraging the adoption of recommendations of the OIE list of antimicrobials of veterinary importance. This is actually a document that has been developed to guide the veterinary professionals in how to use antimicrobials, depending on the criteria and the importance of these antimicrobials. So we share these with member countries and also train them on how they can be used. In other quarters within the continent, we have had personnel trained on biomedical waste management as part of the measures to reduce environmental contamination that comes from veterinary clinics and the likes, and also are supporting the harmonization of veterinary drug registration and regulation. And this has been done together with the UK Veterinary Medicines Directorate. These workshops have been undertaken in the together with the East African Community, the Intergovernmental Authority and for Development, and also for the Economic Community of West Africa states. We said we have an objective to encourage implementation of international standards. So for us, we encourage our member countries in the continent to use the Veterinary International Cooperation on harmonization of registration procedures for veterinary medicines. And also, we promote the use of vaccines as an alternative to irrational use of antibiotics. And a good example we have in the continent is where Zimbabwe is having a project at the moment in developing a vaccine against East Coast fever. That is the disease called Haileyesus in cattle. And if you compare the economic losses the farmers in Zimbabwe are getting because of this East Coast fever disease in cattle, and the amount of money that goes into treatment of this disease using antimicrobials, you will agree with me that having a vaccine to use against the disease is more important and will save the farmers the cost of using antimicrobials. And on our side, we are happy because we are reducing on the need to use antimicrobials in treatment of the same disease. And there are also efforts to work on typhoid vaccines in humans in the same country. We are also having work on developing species-specific antimicrobial treatment guidelines at the country level, because when we have guidance that countries can use to know what veterinary drugs are available for treatment of which diseases and how can they escalate from the least potent to the most potent, it is useful for member countries. And for us, the veterinary services is the building block for work in animal health, and therefore we evaluate their performance against international standards using a PVS tool, which is used to evaluate their performance. And among the critical competencies included in the performance for veterinary services tool is antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial use, where countries are assessed against their capacity to implement national action plan and what they can do to improve on it. So in concluding, I'll just reiterate about the strategy on antimicrobial resistance and prudent use of antimicrobials, which singles out the improvement of AMR awareness and understanding among professionals and other stakeholders. And to this, we do targeted communication and provide advocacy materials. We strengthen the knowledge through surveillance and research, through monitoring and having surveillance system for antimicrobial use, and make sure that we support good governance at country level by having well-trained professionals that will be able to improve animal health and welfare, and at the same time, make sure that antimicrobials are used responsibly and prudently. In encouraging implementation of international standards, we want to improve worldwide production, circulation, and monitoring the use of antimicrobials in animals. So in a nutshell, that's my summary, that we need good quality veterinary services. We need to have legislation that these quality veterinary services would use in doing their work. And we need to continue educating and training our veterinary professionals and paraprofessionals at the country level on the AMR related standards and guidelines, and on awareness of AMR and its risk, and provide them the relevant materials so that they can be able to report on antimicrobial used in their countries to the global database. With these few remarks, I thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Jane, for updating us what WOAH is doing in Africa to curb AMR. We will now hear from Scott Newman, Senior Animal Health and Production Officer for Asia and the Pacific at FAO, who will share the perspective of Asia Pacific region. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me just share my screen. Okay, Do the slides look good at your end?
Yes, very
Okay,
good.
fantastic. Well, thanks for the opportunity to present at the second annual Global Media Forum. My name is Scott Newman. I'm the Senior Animal Health and Production Officer at FAO's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific. I'm based in Thailand, and our region covers Asia and the Pacific countries. I think I want to start by just introducing and helping everyone think through why AMR is really a One Health issue. And I think that the previous speakers have done a great job at sort of opening the door on this topic. But I would just want to flag that, you know, we recognize that there are different ways that antimicrobials get used and also make their way out into the environment. And so we certainly know that if people don't complete their doses of antimicrobials when the doctor prescribes them, they can often end up either in garbage or flush down toilets. We know that inputs can come from manufacturing locations or hospital or healthcare wastewater. We certainly know that the agriculture sector, whether it be aquaculture, crops, or livestock, can also contribute. And so these are really all issues that put us at risk as people for exposure either to water that has antimicrobial agents in it or resistant bacterial in it. And as well, a lot of the products that are mentioned here in the applications refer to food. And so we have to be sure that the food we are eating is safe and not contaminated. And so to do all this really requires this collaborative One Health approach that involves the public health sector, the agriculture and animal production sector, as well as I would say a whole of society approach that also includes local communities all the way up to top government decision makers. Now, from FAO's perspective, you know, we very much focus on food systems transformation, and really the challenge that we face is how do we meet the global demand for food without degrading the environment or increasing the use of antimicrobials or increasing the amount of disease that spreads. And we traditionally have really needed to think about how to produce more livestock, fish and aquaculture, as well as grains, crops, fruits, et cetera. And the approach, I would like to say, has been perhaps less than ideal up to now. And we recognize very clearly that a lot of habitat has been converted, natural habitat, forests, what have you, wetlands, other types of habitats converted into agricultural lands. We've lost a lot of biodiversity and ecosystem services, and some of the production mechanisms and methods have increased the use of antimicrobials. And we also know that this is intensive and more increased use of these products has led to runoff that includes the antimicrobials, potentially resistant pathogens, spreading more widely. And we also know there's a lot of encroachment on natural systems. Now, we know this is how it's been, but in food systems transformation, we recognize that we need to change the way that we do production. And the newer approaches and those things that are really being applied more and more and being upscaled involve climate smart agricultural production, agroecological or nature-based solutions, producing the same amount of food or more food using improved production practices, biosecurity, other types of disease prevention and control that ultimately allows us to decrease the use of antimicrobials in the sector and really use it for specific targeted infection treatment. And so this is really the direction that food system transformation needs to go. And this is something that FAO is working quite diligently on here in the Asia Pacific region. So it's really a larger than an AMR issue, but really very much a One Health issue as we transform systems. Now in the region, we know that at a global level, there's large scale mortality that's predicted to be caused by AMR. And this really, to a large extent, is almost 5 million people by 2050, but current numbers, data from 2019 shows that 1.3 million human deaths have already been occurring here in the region due to antimicrobial resistance. So I think that while we recognize the threat continues to grow, we already have a very severe situation that needs to be addressed now. As has been mentioned, the Global Action Plan was the initial efforts that WHO put together on how to deal with AMR. As a result of that global plan being put into place, FAO developed its action plan, and there was also efforts to then move this down to regional level. And this is kind of the way that we deliver a lot of our work. From global level down to regional application and implementation. More recently, FAO has come through with an additional and new action plan featured here, and we are currently working on our FAO regional strategy for antimicrobial resistance. It's currently being updated, and it will talk to the ways that we translate the global plan into regional implementation and application. I think it's important to recognize that what we want to do is make the food and agriculture sectors, as well as those livelihoods and economies that are dependent upon food and agriculture, more resilient to the impacts of AMR. We want to try to reduce the level of AMR and the emergence and spread of resistance, as well as ensure that efficacy of antimicrobials is preserved. And these colored bars in this diagram are the pillars of the actual action plan. And there's a series of different activities that we deliver underneath each of these pillars. And I think that probably the big take-home message for how we're delivering here in the region is largely we are developing and implementing tools and frameworks. We're providing training and support. We're facilitating coordination and partnerships, and we're enabling sustained implementation. Now, the action plan has sections on awareness, surveillance, good practices, responsible use, and governance. And here at regional level, what we've done is we've started to piece together all of the different interventions. And on this next few slides, what you'll see on the left side are the food and agriculture specific interventions that are taking place. In the middle are the One Health or quadripartite interventions that are taking place. And on the right side are the public health interventions that are taking place. And so in this case, it is speaking to the first pillar, the awareness and engagement pillar, and talks about those areas of work that are being delivered. These are just a snapshot of some of the different awareness products that are available. All of this is available at the FAO website. And if it's not an FAO product, there are links to the other organizations and partners, and you can also go directly to their websites to obtain any of the information. So there's a combination of joint products as well as individual organization products. Now, if we take a look at the second pillar, surveillance and research, again, on the left is the food and agriculture sector interventions that are taking place at regional level. These are things that we're doing to really support surveillance and research. In the middle is the sort of the tripartite and quadripartite areas of work. It was tripartite until recently when UNEP has officially joined. So now we call them tripartite and quadripartite areas of work. And also on the right side are the public health interventions. And similarly, a large number, way too many to really give you detailed information about, but all readily available at the various websites. Now, something I want to draw your attention to is a series of regional antimicrobial and antimicrobial use monitoring and surveillance guidelines. And we've been working on really developing these regional surveillance guidelines. The first one is surveillance in healthy animals. The second one is surveillance in sick animals or animals that are infected but aren't showing clinical signs. The third is on aquaculture, and the fifth is really talking about antimicrobial use data collection at farm level. Now, these guidelines that are featured here are in the final stages of publishing or production. One of them is already out, but the others are just in final phases of editing. The fourth volume, which is on AMR monitoring in animals and the animal environment, as well as this sixth volume, which is really being developed to look at antimicrobial residues in food animals. These two are still being drafted and underway. So in total, we have these 6 different guidelines that are specifically speaking to regional production, regional approaches to dealing with these elements of monitoring and surveillance. Now, I just want to quickly mention the joint plan of action. As you've heard about it already, this is a quadripartite endorsed way forward on how to deliver One Health. And I think that you're aware that some of the action tracks specifically speak to antimicrobial resistance and food safety. And so I want to just touch on those a little bit, because those are actually the action tracks that will guide very much our regional as well as national approach to delivery as we go forward in the coming years. And the one area that I think is very new that takes our work in One Health beyond its traditional limits is really Action Track 6, where we're starting to integrate the environment into One Health and addressing issues of biodiversity loss and environmental degradation. And so this really takes it beyond the traditional areas of work, and then obviously through environmental pollutants, which UNEP already spoke to, AMR being considered one type and one way of looking at antimicrobials, incorporates the environment sector and allows us to go forward in that way as well. Now, Action Track 4 is really about food safety, and antimicrobials are part of the broader picture of food safety. This action track is really aiming at improving food safety risk assessments, focusing on food safety risk management, and then finally food safety risk communication. And so obviously, you know, this has implications for local production and local consumption, as well as international trade and movement of food products, particularly given the antimicrobial issues that we all know need to be addressed prior to food being transported and moved and traded across borders. So this is really the angle through which some of the food safety and AMR issues are linked. And obviously through Codex, there are a variety of other standards that need to be met and that are being applied. And we work as FAO largely through our food safety and food security program on addressing many of the Codex standards on our side of production. Now, the other action track on curbing the silent pandemic of antimicrobial resistance, the major actions under that action track focus on antimicrobial resistance policy, legislation, and practices, One Health response to antimicrobial resistance, and then finally AMR governance. And so again, you can see that these are areas that resonate very largely with the set of activities already underway in the region to deal with antimicrobial resistance, but also help us build upon our successes and expand the program to really deliver One Health directed assistance to the countries and support them in delivering improved antimicrobial resistance policy, legislation, practices, and really to help address the overall global action plan on AMR. Now, I want to mention just a few projects that FAO is currently delivering that are antimicrobial resistance related projects in this region. We recently have been awarded a project through the European Union on working together to fight antimicrobial resistance. This is quite a unique project in the sense that it is officially a tripartite project. So it's FAO, WHO, and WOAH that are working together. And while it was originally set up as a tripartite project, I do want to mention that at the time when the project came to fruition, UNEP had not joined officially, but we had already allocated some resources to commit to UNEP as our fourth partner in delivering this work. And so this is a new project that's just getting up and running here in the region. I'll tell you more about it in just a moment. We also have a project being supported by the Republic of Korea on implementing Codex standards to support containment and reduction of foodborne antimicrobial resistance. Again, I mentioned the importance of food systems transformation, and this project in particular really focuses in on Codex-related antimicrobial resistance issues. A third project is funded by USAID on technical assistance for animal health systems to minimize the impact of antimicrobial resistance in Asia. And this project, as well as the next project funded by the UK, encouraging food and ag sectors, and this has an Africa as well as a Southeast Asia segment, to combat antimicrobial resistance using a One Health approach. These two really focus on addressing a lot of the broader global health security issues and allow us to deliver. So these are some new projects that are getting up and running in the region, and there's more details available at our website. Finally, I just want to go back to the EU-funded project because I think that is one of the newer projects that we're just getting started with, and it has 5 components. And again, you'll see that this is very much harmonized with the action plan, as well as harmonized with the joint plan of action. The first component speaks to national action plans and to helping facilitate them to really be one healthy, and that would include all 4 sectors. The second component is on integrated surveillance, the third on participation of private sector in the control of antimicrobial resistance. The fourth is on research and innovation on AMR, and the fifth relates to pandemic preparedness. So this is one of the new projects that we're putting in place. Again, it's a tripartite plus UNEP related project, and we're very pleased to receive this funding and be able to move this forward collaboratively in the region. I would also say that, we also have projects here that are funded through the Multi-Partner Trust Fund that, again, is also a mechanism that enables the different sectors within the quadripartite to work together. And so these are all areas of work, along with some additional projects from the Fleming Fund and a series of other donors that really are allowing us to work together, not in isolation, not in silos, but as a One Health team addressing antimicrobial resistance. So with that, I'll stop and thank you and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing the AMR scenario in Asia Pacific that hopefully will spur meaningful action from all quarters. I now invite Dr. Kamini Walia, Senior Scientist at Indian Council of Medical Research, who coordinates the antimicrobial resistance and diagnostics initiatives at ICMR, to share briefly with us India's AMR surveillance and response. Over to you, Kamini. Okay, we also have with us today another AMR advocate from India, Dr. Prapti Gilada Toshniwal, who's a microbiologist. Dr. Toshniwal, will you please briefly share the practical strategies to respond to AMR?
I'll just be sharing my slides. Just give me a moment. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, very well. Yes.
And can you see my screen as well?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay. Good afternoon and good evening to all from different parts of the world. I know this has been a long session, but I really appreciate all the speakers before me who've spoken and shared their insights on the different aspects of antimicrobial resistance and how the One Health approach is the way forward for us. I would just like to share a few more insights into what I mean by antimicrobial stewardship and what are the practical approaches or practical strategies which we can implement so that we work towards the AMR problem together. So what is actually antimicrobial stewardship? There is going to be a little overlap. A few of the speakers earlier have covered a few points. Thomas as well has covered several of the points, but I would just like to go through again and stress on a few important aspects of antimicrobial stewardship. So antimicrobial stewardship is a coordinated program that promotes the appropriate use of antimicrobials, which definitely includes the antibiotics against bacteria. The use of these antimicrobials improves patient outcomes because they have some infection or some disease due to the bugs, and it reduces antimicrobial resistance if the antibiotic is used appropriately, and it decreases the spread of infections caused by the multi-drug resistant organisms. So this coordinated program for the appropriate use, I think, is the highlight of our antimicrobial stewardship program. And what are the aspects that are in different acts? So it's got several aspects. I'm going to cover a few practical aspects that we can probably use in our day-to-day work and can be used by everyone involved. So there are a few interventions that can be done prior to or at the time of prescription of an antibiotic. So education and awareness is one of the most important factors. Though it is stated that just education and awareness is not important, but we need to address and we need to make the public aware that actually in a few studies that have been done in India, 412 antibiotic prescriptions per 1,000 persons per year were, so out of the total 1,000 prescriptions, half of the prescriptions were for antibiotics. And over 55% of these were for uncomplicated respiratory symptoms on which the antibiotics will not work at all. And less than 1% of them had any microbiological diagnosis, and many of these were inappropriate or higher antibiotics that were prescribed. And about 2/3 of these drugs are available over the counter. Like we all said, OTC is a very, very important issue that we need to address. So here I would like to say, other than the public awareness, it is also important that our clinicians and our pharmacists, that appropriate education is given wherein what are the antibiotics that we need to give for a particular disease. And, so what are the antibiotics that need to be given for a particular infection? For how long they need to be given? Are there particular tests that we can do so that appropriate treatment can be given? Also, the same awareness needs to be carried forward to the public and also to pharmaceutical companies. And I'm going to come to that a little later, why I say education and awareness, even for the pharmaceutical companies, is important. So very important comes in accurate and rapid diagnosis, because like they stated, several of the tests that need to be done, microbiological tests that need to be done for diagnosis of infections, some of them are expensive. Even though they are rapid, obviously the machinery or the equipments required are not available everywhere. And the time required is more. Like a culture report to give an antimicrobial susceptibility report would take anywhere between 2 to 3 days. So what we require is point of care tests where tests can be done rapidly, reports can be given immediately to the patient, maybe within 2 to 3 hours, and an appropriate treatment can be initiated. Also, a lot of our healthcare setups already have equipments like the Gene Expert and the TrueNat, which we are using as a part of our national tuberculosis program for diagnosis of TB. And I think these same equipments can be used for other tests of infectious diseases. Like, there are Gene Expert kits for carbapenemase detection, for detection of other antimicrobial resistance, and the same with the TrueNat technique. So I think we need to use what, and also we have got now with the COVID pandemic, we have several labs that have a PCR facility. So I think these facilities need to be now used in terms of getting the accurate diagnosis and the accurate antimicrobial susceptibility patterns for the bugs. Once we have these appropriate susceptibility patterns, I think what is going to help us build the antibiogram will be a great help for us to build an antibiogram. So what is actually an antibiogram is when we know that this is the data on which we understand that if there is a urinary tract infection, what is the most common bug that is found in a urinary tract infection. So there might be around 2 to 3 most commonly found bugs, most commonly say E. coli. And what is the susceptibility pattern of that bug? So which are the antibiotics which are most likely to be susceptible in this population? Now, this also helps us build our local guidelines for management of common infections, because once we have the susceptibility pattern, we know that if there is a patient who comes in with a particular infection, the most likely bug is going to be a particular bug, and the most probably effective treatment is going to be a particular antibiotic. So this would help as a guideline, help all the physicians or clinicians to give appropriate treatment. So even if an empirical treatment needs to be initiated, like I said, because at every site and location, you might not get diagnostic facilities available, we still would have treatment policies where this could be the most likely effective treatment for a particular infection. The other thing which a lot of setups should now have, because we deal with so much of antimicrobial resistance in the hospital setups, is a prior authorization of prescribed antibiotics, wherein we know that there are a few classes of antibiotics, higher antibiotics, that should be prescribed only when there is resistance to the other commonly used antibiotics. And once these restricted antibiotic forms are in place, it's going to keep a check on the clinicians whether, if the antibiotic that is being prescribed, does it really need to be prescribed? Has the culture been sent whenever possible? If there is an empirical treatment that has been initiated, they should review and see whether a more narrow spectrum antibiotic, a more narrow spectrum treatment can be given once a diagnosis is sure. So I think this prior authorization will help. And also, like I said, preventing the over-the-counter dispensing of antibiotics. Again, this is a multi-centric approach is needed, because here it's the pharmacist is giving over-the-counter drugs. The laws are in place but are not so stringent that can cause punishable offenses to those who are dispensing these over-the-counter drugs. Also, one more very important factor here is how there should be guidelines and restrictions on how pharmaceutical companies are actually advertising their antimicrobials. Because just going to a family physician or a general physician and advertising that carbapenems are going to work in a particular infection is just going to make the physician, clinician who is probably not very well versed with the antibiotics, prescribe that antibiotic, which is actually a higher antibiotic and should not be prescribed on a normal basis. So I think all these laws and all these guidelines need to be in place to prevent over-the-counter or dispensing of drugs. The other interventions which come in after the antibiotic has been prescribed are a prospective audit and a feedback from an external review of the hospital or of the clinical setup, wherein the stewardship team looks at the prescription and decides whether for this particular clinical case was this antibiotic needed. Could there be any other treatment that could be possible? Is the dosage appropriate? Does another drug need to be added so that they would prevent resistance? Does it need to be given in a different form? I think that perspective is important. Also, an antibiotic timeout where the prescribing physician himself or herself has a look at the patient again after 2 or 3 days to see whether this antibiotic was given, can it be de-escalated? Can it be, can the drug be from a broad spectrum? Can it be reduced to a narrow spectrum? Can the route of administration be changed if the patient is taking drugs orally? And if that drug can be given orally, can it be changed from a parenteral drug to an oral drug? All these aspects will further help in prevention of antimicrobial resistance. Also, the other ongoing interventions like infection prevention and control measures, where we spoke about how important hand hygiene is to prevent infections, so that to prevent the transmission of these infections. Also, our hygiene practices, because I think in preventing infection is going to be a much important factor than actually getting the infection and then treating it. So if we can go one step back and prevent and control the spread of infections, it will really help us a long way. Also, whenever possible, getting vaccinated for Streptococcus pneumonia, Haemophilus influenzae B, typhoid, or even seasonal flu, because even though seasonal flu is not going to work against the bacteria, it's going to work against the seasonal influenza. And a lot of times when patient lands up with the seasonal flu and goes to a doctor, we end up prescribing antibiotics. And several times it is the patient who is insisting that an antibiotic needs to be given for this infection. So I think it's a whole chain. And like we said, it needs to be from all the sides that intervention needs to take place so that we can spread the right awareness and we can take the right steps. My final take-home message would be to stop the over-counter sale of antibiotics, have more stringent laws, more awareness amongst the pharmacists that drugs need to be dispensed only with a prescription. Old prescriptions, a lot of times patients come up with old prescriptions and go to the shop again to take antibiotics. So I think that needs to be stopped. There needs to be a mandatory antimicrobial stewardship training for all doctors, including family physicians and general practitioners, so that they are made aware of what are the steps they as individuals can take so that we do not lead further into the antimicrobial resistance. Also, a restrictive antibiotic prescribing policy where higher antibiotics are prescribed only with a particular indication and are not given to every patient who comes in with a particular infection. And also a very effective and simple public awareness campaign like the ones that World Health Organization is doing and a lot of other organizations are doing, where simple messages for the public to understand that we don't always need an antibiotic. If you are taking an antibiotic, do complete your course, always take it with a prescription, get vaccinated. I think these simple messages need to be translated in different forms through social media, through newspapers, through magazines, so that people understand that these are simple steps that each one of us can take towards prevention of antimicrobial resistance. Thank you so much. I think this is a fight between the bug and us, but we need to realize that if we, all of us together, are much stronger than the bug, and if we work in the right direction, though a long way to go, we will be, we will win this battle against antimicrobial resistance.
Thank you, Prapti. Thank you for an insight presentation. I now invite Dr. Kamini Walia, who's back with us now. And she's a senior scientist at Indian Council of Medical Research, to share briefly with us India's AMR surveillance and response.
Thank you so much. Apologies, I had just stepped out for something and it took me a little longer to come back. So are you able to see my presentation?
Yes, we can see it, yes.
Okay. So a lot of things have been said about the importance of stewardship, the importance of reducing antimicrobial use. I will straight away, since I have been asked to talk about what India has been doing on surveillance and what has been India's progress, I will straight away dive into what has been India's priorities for last few years. So we launched a national action plan in 2017, where we wanted to strengthen these 6 key pillars, which was improving the awareness and understanding around AMR, improve the evidence, improve the infection control practices through HAI surveillance, community engagement, etc., optimize the use of antimicrobials, also strengthen the blue sky research under the innovation and R&D, and of course have the leadership in place to move this agenda. So AMR containment, essentially, these are the pillars for the AMR containment, which improves, requires improving evidence, improving the diagnostic stewardship, having the good infection control practices in hospitals and the community. And without these 2 pillars, which is the diagnostic and infection control stewardship, we cannot practice antimicrobial stewardship. And diagnostic and infection control stewardship is a huge challenge in our country because we have suboptimal investment in the healthcare system, because of which we do not have good labs other than in the tertiary care centers. In the secondary and primary healthcare, this component is essentially missing. And being a tropical country, we also have a very high burden of infectious diseases. This further leads to the sanitation and hygiene problems, and most of the antimicrobials are prescribed to compensate for poor sanitation and hygiene, both in community and hospitals. So if we really want to make progress on antimicrobial stewardship, we have to go back to the blackboard and the basics of improving diagnosis, improving infection control through WOAH strategies and others. So ICMR is a medical research funding organization under Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, and we have had a focused program on AMR, strengthening the research around AMR since 2012. And we have been focusing at generating reliable evidence, improving the diagnostic and the antibiotic stewardship, improving the infection control practices in hospitals. And for this initiative, we mainly work with the tertiary care hospitals. We also focus at understanding the mechanism of resistance prevailing in our country, what are the transmission dynamics. And with the support of FAO and Indian Council of Agriculture Research, we have also created integrated platforms for integrated surveillance, and we support a lot of basic and clinical research. So the surveillance initiatives started essentially in 2013 to monitor the yearly trends and the patterns. We also undertake the phenotypic and genotypic characterization. We have established external quality assurance system. Then we look at the transmission dynamics. Infection control practices needs to be streamlined in the tertiary care hospitals. This program we started in 2015 by creating a hospital-acquired infection surveillance program and initiating a systematic program for infection prevention and control and developing interventions which are appropriate for developing country settings. In 2018, we started an antimicrobial stewardship program. Through this program, we are working with almost 20 to 25 tertiary care hospitals, and in addition, we are working with additional 90 secondary level hospitals. We are helping them create antibiograms, create treatment guidelines, and implement AMSP strategies in their settings. So these are the hospitals for which we work, with which we work for surveillance. These are tertiary care hospitals. We focus on Enterobacteriaceae, gram-negative non-fermenters, enteric fever organisms, diarrheagenic organisms, gram-positives including MRSA, Enterococcus, as well as fungal pathogens. We publish the annual results of this report every year, and all the previous reports are available on ICMR website. What we find is that there is a huge burden of gram-negative pathogens in our country, and the 4 pathogens which are most important are E. coli, Klebsiella pneumoniae, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and Acinetobacter baumannii. And in recent years, we have also seen a spike in the fungal infections because the diagnosis and reporting of fungal infections has been improving consistently in the Indian labs through the systematic capacity building efforts which are undertaken by ICMR. So these are the difficult to treat pathogens in Indian hospitals. Most important ones which require aggressive containment and action are carbapenem-resistant enterobacteriales and Acinetobacter baumannii, then drug-resistant Salmonella typhi and Candida auris. The ones which require sustained action to keep their levels low are the ESBLs, multi-drug-resistant Pseudomonas aeruginosa, vancomycin-resistant Enterococci, and azole-resistant Candida. And then we have another list which requires continuous monitoring and prevention efforts. We are also able to decipher the mechanisms of resistance, what kind of ESBLs, what kind of carbapenemases. What is alarming is that we are seeing consistent increase, almost 5 to 10% increase in the carbapenem resistance every year. And we have also noticed some new mechanisms of resistance. As a result, the new drugs which are in the pipeline or will be hitting Indian market soon, they may not be effective against the mechanisms of resistance which are currently prevailing in India. So our best bet should be to reduce infections as much as possible so that we are able to reduce the antimicrobial pressure which results in development of drug-resistant pathogens. So through the CDC-funded workshop, we are promoting infection control practices in all the healthcare settings, and the aim is to create a trained workforce on IPC in all the hospitals. Under the antimicrobial stewardship program, we have trained almost 60 medical colleges and hospitals on AMSP practices. And in a systematic way, we have initiated the AMSP process in these hospitals. And this paper is recently got accepted in WHO Bulletin, and you should be seeing it soon, early next year, probably in print. What we found was that overall, there was improvement in the AMSP framework and processes which were in place in these tertiary care hospitals after the implementation of this particular project. There was the AMSP document and committee were put in place which were meeting regularly. All hospitals created antibiotic policy. Most of the antibiotic prescriptions were followed by sending of cultures. So there was significant improvement, yet the hospitals reported that they had less time because most of these initiatives are headed by clinicians. They had less time for this particular activity. They needed manpower, for example, clinical pharmacists for this. There was less support from peers, and sometimes there were challenges on data capturing. But what was important was that the two hospitals created a permanent position of a clinical pharmacist after undertaking this project because they realized the importance of having a clinical pharmacist in place. Now, this initiative which we undertook in tertiary care hospital, we are extended it to another 94 private nursing homes and district hospitals in our country. And these smaller hospitals are now being trained on AMSP, infection control implementation, and also being trained on AMR surveillance. So there has been significant uptake of the interventions which are being implemented by ICMR. The structured training programs and resources are necessary for initiating AMSP in hospitals, in LMICs, and the leadership can be provided by intensivists and the physicians wherever the ID physicians are not available. And we have published a large number of guidance documents for antimicrobial susceptibility testing, antimicrobial stewardship, treatment guidelines. Next week, we'll also be launching an app, a mobile app for the treatment guidelines. There is also a guideline on the management of carbapenem-resistant organisms. So there is one on management of Candida auris infection. So all this has been done by ICMR, and we are consistently trying to improve the evidence as well as the guidance which is available to Indian clinicians. And we make sure that the guidance is based on the evidence which is generated within the country. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. So I thank you, Dr. Walia, for your very, very informative presentation and for emphasizing on going back to the basics along with doing other interventions to curb AMR. And this really brings some ray of hope to deal with this menace in India and elsewhere. We have already overshot the time by, I think, half an hour or so. So we are not in a position to take up any more questions, but we will share the contact details of panelists with the participants so they can contact them directly. Also, after listening to such rich presentations from our panelists, it would be the fitness of things to hear from some of our co-hosts and journalists who are representing media associations before concluding this forum. And because small is beautiful, I would request them to share your short 30-second message on World Antimicrobial Awareness Week and why antimicrobial resistance and One Health approach is important in your context. And first of all, I invite Nurul Islam Hasib, General Secretary of Dhaka Reporters Unity, which is the largest journalist association of Bangladesh, to please give his message. Yes, Nurul.
Hi, Shobha. Hello.
Yes, please continue. Please start.
Thank you. I'll be very brief in 30 seconds. So it's a very useful topic, and for the Bangladesh context, is this antimicrobial resistance week is very important, because here we can already see that in Bangladesh, anybody can buy any drug from any drug shops, say antibiotic or anything. So doctors are already reporting that they find it difficult to treat patients in using, even the latest antibiotics. So, and for that, our government has already formulated a plan, national action plan in 2017-18, maybe 2018, but we didn't see the implementation of that action plan. And in that action plan, there was acknowledgement of multi-sectoral approach, which is One Health approach, but still there is no implementation of that. So, but this is very urgent for Bangladesh. And regarding One Health, we have an example, that during the Nipah virus pandemic, Nipah virus outbreak, which was endemic in Bangladesh in some districts. So during that time, we have seen that how our genetic, animal health division and human health division, they worked together. So we already have a good example of that. So I think in this context is antimicrobial issues. So there is a scope to work together as a One Health approach. Thank you.
Thank you. Esther Nagazi, President of Health Journalists Network of Uganda. Esther.
Yeah, I was unmuted. Thank you so much. My name is Esther Nakazi, and thank you for this interesting talk. We have really learned a lot from it, and we hope that we can further on go on and work together to bring AMR to the fore, because here in Africa, it is still a subject that is that we are learning to really explore and talk about. So this has been very eye-opening and very enlightening, and we are very grateful for this partnership with CNS, and we hope that we can do this again. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Kalpana Acharya, on behalf of Asia Pacific Media Alliance for Health and Development Board. She is also former president of Health Journalists Forum of Nepal.
Thank you, Shobhaji. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be a part of this wonderful program, today's program. I have nothing to say more, but yes, antimicrobial resistance is a huge health threat around the world. We know that. My message is today to combat AMR. There is a need of political commitment as well as mass campaign through different types of media like radio, television, online news portals. We can use social media too, so that public can get the information about the AMR and they may aware about this. And another message is more discussions, interactions, and debates need to be done. I think so, because many people don't know about the AMR. And my last message is never take antibiotics without prescription, and never take antibiotics prescribed for someone else. Thank you. Thank you. I personally learned very much from this session. Thank you, Shobhaji, and thank you, organizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then we have Caroline Oyugi, Kenya Environment and Science Journalists Association. Caroline from Kenya Environment and Science Journalists Association.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, thank you very much for involving us in this discussion. This topic comes at the right time and is very relevant to what we do as an organization and individually as science and health journalists. Kenya is one of the countries that has been affected by the antimicrobial resistance, and there has been little discussion about it, but not as much as we would want it to be. So with this partnership, we intend to make an impact in this global discussion and start it from the grassroots up to the global level. We'll also push for government and political support and try our best to simplify the available information so that it can be understood by people of all ages and caliber. In Kenya, we have this common saying that simplify the information to an extent that your grandmother in the village can understand and apply the information that you have delivered. Let them not just hear it and go about without doing anything about it. So that is what we intend to be, and we are happy to be partners, and we look forward to further engagements.
Thank you. I have a written message from Ode Udu, who's a data journalist from Data Fight in Nigeria. He had to go to attend some other meeting. Udu says that we live in a dependent society and the interconnections between humans, animal, and plants is very glaring. This interaction and multidimensional use of antimicrobial resistance emphasizes the relevance of the One Health approach. Health of all gives us a healthy society. Now, Anna Miti, Health Communicators Forum, Zimbabwe. Yes, Anna. Okay, we have Lakshman Dutt Pant from Media Action Nepal.
Hi, Shobhaji and CNS. Yes. Thank you very much for inviting us and inviting us to be the part of this important discussion. More of technical and medical terminologies, but very less exposed to the general public. So as a very active and vibrant civil society organization, reaching out to journalists across Nepal through our province offices and through partnerships, we have been working with journalists and media rights organizations in South Asia and beyond. So there are a lot of resources. I was listening some of the experts presenting their presentations today from FAO, WHO, and other medical fields. But these resources have been less exposed to the public through media. Maybe one reason is that journalists and media have not been exposed to writing about AMR, its impact to the lives of people. We're talking about One Health approach, how these issues could impact the lives of humans in particular. So we would be interested doing some skills-based capacity building programs for journalists, maybe in the region. Also, we would be very much interested reaching out to journalists, expanding their horizon on how these important issues could be reported efficiently so that people are more aware about their lives through plants, to animals, to any other environment that they belong to. Thank you, Shobhaji.
Thank you very much. With this, we come to the close of today's program. My sincere thanks to all the quadripartite organizations and the speakers for sharing their valuable insights on the various manifestations of antimicrobial resistance and One Health. I also thank the participants for their lively engagement with the forum. Above all, I am very grateful to WHO for their support. And last but not the least, special thanks to Thomas Joseph and his team for their continuous guidance. I'm sure all our participants are taking home with them many thought-provoking lessons to help shape their articles and stories around AMR. I'm sure the pen and the typing will be able to do much more and add to the arsenal against AMR. Goodbye till we meet again. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.